The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. It was the evening on which Messieurs Desbiens and Poligny, the managers of the opera, were giving a farewell gala performance to make their retirement. Suddenly, the dressing-room of La Sorelli, one of the principal dancers, was invaded by half a dozen young ladies of the ballet. They rushed in amid great confusion, some giving vent to forced and unnatural laughter, others to cries of terror. Sorelli, who wished to be alone for a moment to polish up the speech which he was to make to the resigning managers, looked round angrily at the mad and tumultuous crowd. It was little Jeanne who gave the explanation in a trembling voice. It's the ghost." "Have you seen him?" "As plainly as I see you now," moaned little Jeanne, whose legs were giving way beneath her, and she dropped into a chair. "If that's the ghost, he's very ugly," said Giry. "Oh, yes," cried the chorus of ballet girls, and they all began to talk together. The ghost had appeared to them in the shape of a gentleman in dress clothes, who had suddenly stood before them in the passage without their knowing where he came from. He seemed to have loomed through the wall. For several months there had been nothing discussed at the opera but this ghost in dress clothes who stalked about the building from top to bottom like a shadow, who spoke to nobody, to whom nobody dared speak, and who vanished as soon as he was seen, no one knowing how or where. Yet who had actually seen him? You meet so many men in dress clothes at the opera who are not ghosts, but this dress suit had a peculiarity of its own. It clothed a skeleton, at least so the ballet girls said, and, of course, it had a death's head. Was all this serious? The truth is that the idea of the skeleton came from the description of the ghost given by Joseph Bouquet, the chief scene-shifter, who had really seen the ghost. He had run up against the ghost on the little staircase by the footlights, which leads straight down to the cellars. He had seen him for a second, for the ghost had fled, and to anyone who cared to listen to him he said, "He's extraordinarily thin, and his dress coat hangs on a skeleton frame. His eyes are so deep that you can hardly see the fixed pupils. All you see is two black holes, as in a dead man's skull." To return to the evening in question. It's the ghost," little Jeanne had cried. An agonizing silence now reigned in the dressing-room. "Come, children, pull yourselves together. I dare say no one has ever seen the ghost," said Sorelli. Yes, we saw him just now," cried the girls. "He had his death's head and his dress coat, just as when he appeared to Joseph Bouquet. And Gabrielle saw him too," said Jeanne. "Only yesterday afternoon in broad daylight." "Gabrielle? The chorus master?" "Why, yes, didn't you know? And he was wearing his dress clothes in broad daylight." "Who, Gabrielle?" "Why, no, the ghost." "Certainly. Gabrielle told me so himself. That's what he knew him by. Gabrielle was in the stage manager's office. Suddenly the door opened and the Persian entered. You know the Persian has the evil eye." "Oh, yes," answered the little ballet girls in chorus. "And you know how superstitious Gabrielle is," continued Jeanne. "However, he's always polite, and when he meets the Persian he just puts his hand in his pocket and touches his keys. Well, the moment the Persian appeared in the doorway, Gabrielle gave one jump from his chair to the lock of the cupboard, so as to touch iron. In so doing, he tore a whole skirt of his overcoat on a nail. He rushed out of the office like a madman, slipped on the staircase, and came down the whole of the first flight on his back. I was just passing with Mother. We picked him up. He was covered with bruises, and his face was all over blood. Then he told us what had frightened him. He'd seen the ghost behind the Persian, the ghost with the death's head, just like Joseph Bouquet's description." Little Giry said, "Joseph Bouquet would do better to hold his tongue." "Why should he hold his tongue?" asked somebody. "That's Ma's opinion," replied Meg. "Why does your mother say so?" Because... nothing." This reticence exasperated the curiosity of the young ladies, who crowded round little Giry, begging her to explain herself. "Well, it's because of the private box." "What private box?" The ghost's box." "Has the ghost a box?" Oh, do tell us, do tell us." "Not so loud," said Meg. "It's box 5, you know. The box on the grand tier, next to the stage box on the left." "Oh, nonsense." "I tell you it is. Ma has charge of it. But you swear you won't say a word?" Of course. "Well, that's the ghost's box. No one has had it for over a month, except the ghost, and orders have been given at the box office that it must never be sold." "Does the ghost really come there?" "Yes." "Then somebody does come?" "Why, no, the ghost comes, but there's nobody there. Ma has never seen him, but she has heard him. Ma knows because she gives him his programme." Sorelli interfered. "Giry, child, you're getting at us." Thereupon little Giry began to cry. I ought to have held my tongue. If Ma ever got to know. But it's true enough. Joseph Bouquet had no business to talk of things that don't concern him. It will bring him bad luck. Ma was saying so last night." There was a sound of heavy and hurried footsteps in the passage, and a breathless voice cried, "Cécile? Cécile, are you there?" "It's Ma's voice," said Jeanne. "What's the matter?" She opened the door. A respectable lady, built on the lines of a Pomeranian grenadier, burst into the dressing-room and dropped, groaning, into a vacant armchair. "Oh, how awful," she said. "How awful!" What? "Joseph Bouquet." "Well, what about him?" "Joseph Bouquet is dead." The room became filled with exclamations, with astonished outcries, with scared requests for explanations. "Yes, he was found hanging, down in the third-floor cellar." "It's the ghost," blurted little Giry, as though in spite of herself. But she at once corrected herself, with her hands pressed to her mouth. No, I didn't say it. All around her, her panic-stricken companions repeated under their breaths, "Yes, it must be the ghost." Sorelli was very pale. "I shall never be able to recite my speech," she said. Ma Jeanne gave her opinion, while she drained a glass of liqueur that happened to be standing on the table. "The ghost must have had something to do with it." The truth is that no one ever knew how Joseph Bouquet met with his death. The verdict at the inquest was natural suicide. The horrid news soon spread all over the opera, where Joseph Bouquet was very popular. The dressing-rooms emptied, and the little ballet girls, crowding round Sorelli like timid sheep around their shepherdess, made for the foyer, through the ill-lit passages and staircase, trotting as fast as their little pink legs could carry them. On the first landing, Sorelli ran against the Comte de Chagny, who was coming upstairs. The Count, who was generally so calm, seemed greatly excited. "I was just coming to you," he said, taking off his hat. "Oh, Sorelli, what an evening! And Christine Daae, what a triumph!" The Comte de Chagny was right. No gala performance had ever equalled this. But the real triumph was reserved for Christine Daae, who had begun by singing a few passages from Romeo and Juliet. It was the first time that the young artist sang in this work of Gounod. Those who heard her say that her voice in these passages was seraphic. But this was nothing to the superhuman notes that she gave forth in the prison scene, and the final trio in Faust, which she sang in the place of La Carlotta, who was ill. No one had ever heard or seen anything like it. The whole house went mad, rising to its feet, shouting, cheering, clapping, while Christine sobbed and fainted in the arms of her fellow singers, and had to be carried to her dressing-room. On that evening, the Count was accompanied by his brother Raoul, a young naval officer. The Count, after applauding the Daae, turned to Raoul and saw that he was quite pale. "Don't you see," said Raoul, "that the woman's fainting?" "You look like fainting yourself," said the Count. "What's the matter?" But Raoul had recovered himself and was standing up. "Let's go," he said in a trembling voice. "Well, where do you want to go to, Raoul?" asked the Count, astonished at the excitement shown by his younger brother. Let's go and see her. She never sang like that before." The Count gave his brother a curious, smiling glance, and seemed quite pleased. They were soon at the door leading from the house to the stage. They pushed through the crowd of gentlemen, scene-shifters, supers, and chorus girls, Raoul leading the way, his face set with passions, feeling that his heart no longer belonged to him, while Count Philippe followed him with difficulty and continued to smile. Postponing his usual visit to Sorelli for a few minutes, the Count followed his brother down the passage that led to Dai's dressing-room, and saw it had never been so crammed as on that evening, when the whole house seemed excited by her success, and also by her fainting fit. For the girl had not yet come to, and the doctor of the theatre had just arrived at the moment when Raoul entered at his heels. Christine, therefore, received the first aid of the one, while opening her eyes in the arms of the other. The Count and many more remained crowding in the doorway. "Don't you think, Doctor, that these gentlemen had better clear the room?" asked Raoul coolly. "There's no breathing here." "You're quite right," said the doctor. And he sent everyone away, except Raoul and the maid. The doctor imagined that the young man was acting as he did, because he had every right to. The Vicomte, therefore, remained in the room and watched Christine slowly return to life. She turned her head, saw Raoul, and started. She looked at the doctor, on whom she bestowed a smile, then at her maid, then at Raoul again. "Monsieur," she said in a voice not much above a whisper, "who are you?" "Mademoiselle," replied the young man, kneeling on one knee and pressing a fervent kiss on the diva's hand, "I am the little boy who went into the sea to rescue your scarf." Christine again looked at the doctor and the maid, and all three began to laugh. Raoul turned very red and stood up. "Mademoiselle," he said, "since you are pleased not to recognize me, I should like to say something to you in private, something very important." "When I am better, do you mind?" And her voice shook. You have been very good." "Yes, you must go," said the doctor, with his pleasantest smile. "Leave me to attend to Mademoiselle." "I'm not ill now," said Christine, suddenly with strange and unexpected energy. She rose, and passing her hand over her eyelids, "Thank you, doctor. I should like to be alone. Please go away, all of you. Leave me. I feel very restless this evening." The doctor tried to make a short protest, but, perceiving the girl's evident agitation, thought that the best remedy was not to thwart her, and he went away, saying to Raoul outside, "She's not herself tonight. She's usually so gentle." And then he said good night, and Raoul was left alone. The whole of this part of the theatre was now deserted. The farewell ceremony was no doubt taking place in the foyer of the ballet. Raoul waited in the shadow of a doorway. Suddenly, the dressing-room door opened, and the maid came out by herself, carrying bundles. He stopped her and asked how her mistress was. The woman laughed, and said that she was quite well, but he must not disturb her, for she wished to be left alone. And she passed on. A single idea crossed Raoul's burning brain. Of course, Dai wished to be left alone for him. Had he not told her that he wanted to speak to her privately? Hardly breathing, he went up to the dressing-room and prepared to knock. But his hand dropped. He had heard a man's voice in the dressing-room saying, in a curiously masterful tone, "Christine, you must love me." And Christine's voice, infinitely sad and trembling as though accompanied by tears, replied, "How can you talk like that, when I sing only for you?" The man's voice spoke again. "Are you very tired?" "Oh, tonight I gave you my soul. and I am dead. Your soul is a beautiful thing, child, replied the man's grave voice, and I thank you. No emperor ever received so fair a gift. The angels wept tonight. Raoul heard nothing after that. Nevertheless, he did not go away, but as though fearing lest he should be discovered, returned to his dark corner, determined to wait for the man to leave the room. At one and the same time he had learned what love meant and hatred. He knew that he loved. He wanted to know whom he hated. To his great astonishment, the door opened and Christine Daae appeared, wrapped in furs with her face hidden in a lace veil, alone. She closed the door behind her, but did not lock it. She passed him. He did not even follow her with his eyes, for his eyes were fixed on the door, which did not open again. When the passage was once more deserted, he crossed it, opened the door of the dressing-room, went in and shut the door. He found himself in absolute darkness. The gas had been turned out. "There is someone here," said Raoul, with his back against the closed door, in a quivering voice. "What are you hiding for?" All was darkness and silence. He struck a match. Its flame lit the room. There was no one in the room. Raoul, first turning the key in the door, lit the gas jets. He went into the dressing-room closet, opened the cupboards, hunted about, felt the walls with his moist hands. Nothing. "Look here," he said aloud. "Am I going mad?" He went out, not knowing what he was doing nor where he was going. At a given moment in his wayward progress, an icy draught struck him in the face. He found himself at the foot of a staircase, down which, behind him, a procession of workmen were carrying a sort of stretcher, covered with a white sheet. "Which way is the way out, please?" he asked one of the men. "Straight in front of you. The door's open. But let us pass." Pointing to the stretcher, he asked mechanically, "What's that?" The workman answered, "That is Joseph Bouquet, who was found in the third cellar, hanging between a set piece and a scene from the Roi de Leroux." He took off his hat, fell back to make way for the procession, and went out. The first few days which the new managers spent at the opera were given over to the delight of finding themselves the heads of so magnificent an enterprise, and they had forgotten all about the curious, fantastic story of the ghost, when an incident occurred which proved to them that the joke, if joke it were, was not over. Monsieur Firmin Richard reached his office that morning at 11 o'clock. His secretary, Madame Remé, handed him a letter. "Dear Mr. Manager, I am sorry to have to trouble you at a time when you must be so very busy renewing important engagements, signing fresh contracts, and generally displaying your excellent taste. All the same, I should like to take advantage of the fact that you have not yet turned Christine Daae adrift by hearing her this evening in the part of Cybele, as that of Margarita has been withheld from her since her triumph the other night. And I must ask you not to dispose of my box today, nor on the following days. For I cannot end this letter without telling you how disagreeably surprised I have been lately, on arriving at the opera, to hear that my box had been sold at the box office by your orders. I did not protest, first because I dislike scandal, and secondly because I thought that your predecessors, Messieurs Desbiens and Poligny, who were always charming to me, had neglected before leaving to mention my little fads to you. I have now received a reply from these gentlemen to my letter asking for an explanation, and this reply proves that you know all about my clause in the lease, and consequently that you are treating me with outrageous contempt. If you wish us to live in peace, you must not begin by taking away my private box. Believe me to be, dear Mr. Manager, without prejudice to these little observations, your most humble and obedient servant, Opera Ghost. Monsieur Firmin Richard had hardly finished reading this letter when Monsieur Armand Moncharmin entered carrying one exactly similar. They looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Ha! They're keeping up the joke," said Monsieur Richard, "but I don't call it funny." "What does it all mean?" asked Monsieur Moncharmin. "Do they imagine that because they have been managers of the opera, we are going to let them have a box for an indefinite period?" "I'm not in the mood to allow myself to be humbugged much longer," said Firmin Richard. And that evening, Box 5 was sold. The next morning, Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin, on reaching their office, found an inspector's report relating to an incident that had happened the night before in Box 5. "Send for the inspector," said Richard to his secretary, who had already read the report and marked it in blue pencil. Madame Rémy, the secretary, had foreseen the order and called the inspector in at once. "Tell us what happened," said Richard bluntly. The inspector began to splutter and referred to the report. "Well, what were all those people laughing at?" asked Moncharmin. Well, they must have been dining, sir, and seemed more inclined to lark about than to listen to good music. The moment they entered the box, they came out again and called the box-keeper, who asked them what they wanted. They said, 'Look in the box.' 'There's no one in there, is there?' 'No,' said the woman. 'Well,' said they, 'when we went in, we heard a voice saying that the box was taken.'" Monsieur Moncharmin could not help smiling as he looked at Monsieur Richard. But Monsieur Richard did not smile. "When those people arrived," roared Richard, "there was no one in the box, was there?" "Oh, not a soul, sir, not a soul. Nor in the box on the right, nor in the box on the left. Not a soul, sir, I swear. The box-keeper told me so often enough, which proves that it was all a joke." "Oh, you agree, do you?" said Richard. "You agree? It's a joke. And you think it funny, no doubt?" "Well, I think it in very bad taste, sir." "And what did the box-keeper say?" Well, she just said that it was the opera ghost. That's all she said." And the inspector grinned. But he soon found that he had made a mistake in grinning, for the words were no sooner out of his mouth than Monsieur Richard became furious. "Send for the box-keeper!" he shouted. "Send for her! This minute! This minute!" The inspector thought he could go, and was gently sidling toward the door, when Monsieur Richard nailed the man to the floor with a thundering, "Stay where you are!" The box-keeper soon made her appearance. "What is your name?" "Ma'am Giry. You know me well enough, sir. I'm the mother of little Giry, little Meg." "Never heard of her. But that's no reason, Ma'am Giry, why I shouldn't ask you what happened last night to make you and the inspector call in a municipal guard." "I'll tell you what happened. The ghost has been annoyed again." Thereupon, as Monsieur Richard was on the point of bursting out, Monsieur Moncharmin interfered and conducted the interrogation, whence it appeared that Madame Giry thought it quite natural that a voice should be heard to say that a box was taken, when there was nobody in the box. She was unable to explain this phenomenon, which was not new to her, except by the intervention of the ghost. Nobody could see the ghost in his box, but everybody could hear him. She had often heard him, and they could believe her, for she always spoke the truth. "So, you have spoken to the ghost, my good lady?" "As I'm speaking to you now, my good sir." "And when the ghost speaks to you, what does he say?" "Well, he tells me to bring him a footstool." This time Richard burst out laughing, as did Moncharmin and Rémy, the secretary. "A ghost asking for a footstool? Then this ghost of yours is a woman." No, the ghost is a man." "How do you know?" "Well, he has a man's voice. Oh, such a lovely man's voice. This is what happens. When he comes to the opera, it's usually in the middle of the first act. He gives 3 little taps on the door of Box 5. The first time I heard those 3 taps, when I knew there was no one in the box, you can think how puzzled I was. I opened the door, listened, looked. Nobody. And then I heard a voice say, 'Ma'am Jules.' My poor husband's name was Jules. 'A footstool, please.' Saving your presence, gentlemen, it made me feel all overish like. But the voice went on. 'Don't be afraid, Ma'am Jules. I'm the opera ghost.' And the voice was so soft and kind that hardly felt frightened at all. The voice was sitting in the corner chair on the right, in the front row. "And what did you do?" "Well, I brought the footstool. Of course it wasn't for himself he wanted it, but for his lady. But I never heard her, nor saw her." "Eh? What? So now the ghost was married?" The eyes of the two managers travelled from Margarita to the inspector, who, standing behind the box-keeper, tapped his forehead with a distressful forefinger, to convey his opinion that the widow Jules Giry was most certainly mad. Meanwhile, the worthy lady went on about her ghost, now depicting his generosity. "At the end of the performance, he always gives me 2 francs, sometimes 5, sometimes even 10, when he has been away many days without coming. Only since people have begun to annoy him again, he gives me nothing at all." "Excuse me, my good woman," said Moncharmin. "How does the ghost manage to give you your 2 francs? "Why, he leaves it on the little shelf in the box, of course. I find it with the programme which I always give him. Some evenings I find flowers in the box, a rose that must have been dropped from his lady's bodice, for he brings a lady with him sometimes. One day they left a fan behind them." "Oh, the ghost left a fan, did he? And what did you do with it?" "Well, I brought it back to the box next night." "You brought back the fan? And then?" "Well, then they took it away with them, sir. It was not there at the end of the performance, and in its place they left me a box of English sweets, which I'm very fond of. That's one of the ghost's pretty thoughts." "That will do, Mame Giry. You can go." When Mame Giry had bowed herself out, with the dignity that never deserted her, the managers told the inspector that they had decided to dispense with that old mad woman's services, and, when he had gone in his turn, the managers told each other of the idea which they both had in mind, which was that they should look into that little matter of Box 5 for themselves. Christine Daae did not immediately continue her triumph at the opera. She refused, without plausible excuse, to appear at a charity concert, to which she had promised her assistance. She acted throughout as though she were no longer the mistress of her own destiny, and as though she dreaded a fresh triumph. She showed herself nowhere, and the Vicomte de Chagny tried in vain to meet her. He wrote to her, asking leave to call upon her, but had given up all hope of receiving a reply when, one morning, she sent him the following note. "Monsieur, I have not forgotten the little boy who went into the sea to rescue my scarf. I feel that I must write to you today when I am going to Perros in fulfillment of a sacred duty. Tomorrow is the anniversary of the death of my poor father, whom you knew and who was very fond of you. He is buried there with his violin in the graveyard of the little church at the bottom of the slope, where we used to play as children, beside the road where, when we were a little bigger, we said goodbye for the last time." The Vicomte de Chagny hurriedly consulted a railway guide. He spent a dismal day in town and didn't recover his spirits until the evening, when seated in his compartment in the Brittany Express. He read Christine's note over and over again, recalling the sweet pictures of his childhood, and spent the rest of that tedious night journey in feverish dreams that began and ended with Christine Daae. Day was breaking when he alighted at Lannion. He hurried to the diligence for Perros. He was the only passenger. He questioned the driver and learned that on the evening of the previous day a young lady who looked like a Parisian had gone to Perros and put up at the inn known as the Setting Sun. Perros was reached at last. Raoul walked into the smoky parlour of the Setting Sun and saw Christine standing before him, smiling and showing no astonishment. "So you've come," she said. "I felt that I should find you here when I came back from Mass. Someone told me so at the church." "Who?" asked Raoul, taking her little hand in his. "Why, my poor dead father." "Did your father tell you that I love you, Christine, and that I cannot live without you?" Christine blushed. "Me? You are dreaming, my friend. and she burst out laughing to put herself in countenance. "Don't laugh, Christine. I'm quite serious. I did not send for you to tell me such things as that." "You sent for me, Christine. How can you have thought that if you did not think I loved you?" "I thought you would remember our games here as children, in which my father so often joined. I really don't know what I thought. Perhaps I was wrong to write to you. This anniversary and your sudden appearance in my room at the opera the other evening reminded me of the time long past." "When you saw me in your dressing room, was that the first time you noticed me, Christine?" "Oh, no," she said. "I'd often seen you in your brother's box." "I thought so," said Raoul. "But then why, when you saw me in your room at your feet, reminding you that I had rescued your scarf from the sea, why did you answer me as though you did not know me? And also, why did you laugh?" The tone of these questions was so rough that Christine stared at Raoul without replying. "You don't answer," he said angrily and unhappily. "Well, I will answer for you. It was because there was someone in the room who was in your way, Christine. Someone whom you did not wish to know that you could be interested in anyone else." "If anyone was in my way that evening, it was yourself, because I told you to leave the room." "Yes, so that you might remain with the other." "What are you saying, monsieur? And what other do you refer to?" "To the man to whom you said, 'I sing only for you. Tonight I gave you my soul, and I am dead.'" Christine seized Raoul's arm and clutched it with a strength which no one would have suspected in so frail a creature. "Then you were listening behind the door?" "Yes, because I love you. And I heard everything." "You heard what?" "He said to you, 'Christine, you must love me.'" Go on. Go on, tell me all you heard." "I heard him reply, when you said that you had given him your soul, 'Your soul is a beautiful thing, child, and I thank you. No emperor ever received so fair a gift. The angels wept tonight.'" Christine carried her hand to her heart, a prey to indescribable emotion. Her eyes stared before her like a madwoman's. Raoul was terror-stricken. But suddenly Christine's eyes moistened, and two great tears trickled like two pearls down her ivory cheeks. "Christine." "Raoul." The young man tried to take her in his arms, but she escaped and fled in great disorder. While Christine remained locked in her room, Raoul was at his wits' end what to do. Why did she not come to roam with him through the country, where they had so many memories in common? And, as she seemed to have nothing more to do at Perros, why did she not go back to Paris at once? He heard that she had had a mass said that morning for the repose of her father's soul, and that she had spent a long time praying in the little church and on the fiddler's tomb. Raoul walked away dejectedly to the churchyard, and wandered alone among the graves. Skeletons and skulls by the hundred were heaped against the wall of the church, held in position by a wire that left the whole gruesome stack visible. The door of the sacristy opened in the middle of that bony structure, which is often seen beside old Breton churches. Raoul said a prayer for Dai, and then, painfully impressed by the eternal smiles on the mouths of all those skulls, he climbed the slope and sat down on the edge of the moor overlooking the sea. The wind fell with the evening. Raoul was surrounded by icy darkness, but he did not feel the cold. It was here, he remembered, that he used to come with little Christine to see the fairies dance at the rising of the moon. He'd never seen any, whereas Christine pretended that she'd seen many. He smiled at the thought, and then suddenly gave a start. A voice behind him said, "Do you think the fairies will come this evening?" It was Christine. He tried to speak. She put her gloved hand on his mouth. "Listen, Raoul. I have decided to tell you something serious, very serious. Do you remember the legend of the Angel of Music?" "I do indeed," he said. "I believe it was here that your father first told it to us." "And it was here that he said, When I am in heaven, my child, I will send him to you. Well, Raoul, my father is in heaven, and I have been visited by the angel of music. I have no doubt of it, replied the young man gravely. No human being can sing as you sang the other evening without the intervention of some miracle. No professor on earth can teach you such accents as those. You have heard the angel of music, Christine. Yes, she said solemnly. In my dressing room. That is where he comes, to give me my daily lesson. In your dressing room? Yes, that is where I've heard him. And I have not been the only one to hear him. Who else heard him, Christine? You, my friend. I? I heard the angel of music? Yes, the other evening. It was he who was talking when you were listening behind the door. It was he who said, "You must love me." But I then thought that I was the only one to hear his voice. Imagine my astonishment when you told me this morning that you heard him too. Raoul burst out laughing. Christine turned on Raoul with a hostile air. What are you laughing at? You think you heard a man's voice, I suppose. You, my old playfellow. You, my father's friend. How you've changed since those days. What are you thinking of? I am an honest girl, Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny, and I don't lock myself up in my dressing room with men's voices. If you'd opened the door, you would have seen that there was no one there. That's true. I did open the door when you were gone, and I found no one in the room. So you see. Well? Christine, I think that someone is making game of you. She gave a cry and ran away. He ran after her, but in a tone of fierce anger she called out, "Leave me! Leave me!" And she disappeared. Raoul returned to the inn, feeling very sad. He was told that Christine had gone to her bedroom, saying that she would not be down for dinner. Raoul dined alone. Then he went to his room and tried to read, went to bed and tried to sleep. There was no sound in the next room. It was about 11:30 when he distinctly heard someone moving, with a light, stealthy step, in the room next to his. Then Christine had not gone to bed. Raoul dressed, taking care not to make a sound, and waited. But his heart thumped in his chest when he heard Christine's door turn slowly on its hinges. Where could she be going at this hour? Softly, opening the door, he saw Christine's white form in the moonlight slip along the passage. She went down the stairs, and he leaned over the banister above her. Suddenly, he heard two voices in rapid conversation. He caught one sentence. "Don't lose the key." It was the landlady's voice. The door facing the sea was opened and locked again. Then all was still. Raoul ran back to his room and threw open the window. Christine's white form stood on the deserted quay. The first floor of the setting sun was at no great height, and a tree growing against the wall enabled him to climb down unknown to the landlady. Her amazement, therefore, was great when, the next morning, the young man was brought back to her half-frozen, more dead than alive, and when she learned that he had been found stretched at full length on the steps of the high altar of the little church. She ran at once to tell Christine, who hurried down and, with the help of the landlady, did her best to revive him. He soon opened his eyes, and was not long in recovering when he saw his friend's charming face bent over him. A few weeks later, when the tragedy at the opera compelled the intervention of the public prosecutor, Monsieur Mifroid, the commissary of police, examined the Vicomte de Chagny, touching the events of the night of Perros. I quote the questions and answers as given in the official report. Question. Did Mademoiselle Daae not see you come down from your room by the curious road which you selected? Response. No, monsieur, no. Although when walking behind her, I took no pains to deaden the sound of my footsteps, but she seemed not to hear me and acted exactly as though I were not there. She quietly left the quay and then suddenly walked quickly up the road. The church clock had struck 11:45, and I thought that this must have made her hurry, for she began almost to run and continued at this pace until she came to the churchyard. She knelt down by her father's grave, made the sign of the cross, and began to pray. At that moment it struck midnight. At the last stroke I saw Mademoiselle Daille lift her eyes to the sky and stretch out her arms as though in ecstasy. I was wondering what the reason could be, when I myself raised my head and everything within me seemed drawn towards the unseen, which was playing the most perfect music. Christine and I knew that music. We had heard it as children, but it had never been executed with such divine art, not even by Mademoiselle Daille. I remembered all that Christine had told me of the angel of music. The air was the resurrection of Lazarus, which old Monsieur Daille used to play to us in his hours of melancholy and of faith. If Christine's angel had existed, he could not have played better that night on the late musician's violin. When the music stopped, I seemed to hear a noise from the skulls in the heap of bones. It was as though they were chuckling, and I could not help shuddering. Question. Did it not occur to you that the musician might be hiding behind that very heap of bones? Response. It was the one thought that did occur to me, monsieur, so much so that I omitted to follow Mademoiselle Daille when she stood up and walked slowly to the gate. She was so much absorbed just then that she did not see me. Question. Then what happened that you were found in the morning lying half dead on the steps of the high altar? Response. First a skull rolled to my feet, then another, then another. It was as if I were the jack of that ghastly game of bowls, and I had an idea that a false step must have destroyed the balance of the structure behind which our musician was concealed. This surmise seemed to be confirmed when I saw a shadow suddenly glide along the sacristy wall. I ran up. The shadow had already pushed open the door and entered the church, but I was quicker than the shadow and caught hold of a corner of its cloak. At that moment we were just in front of the high altar, and the moonbeams fell straight upon us through the stained-glass windows of the apse. As I did not let go of the cloak, the shadow turned round, and I saw a terrible death's head, which darted a look at me from a pair of scorching eyes. I felt as if I were face to face with Satan, and in the presence of this unearthly apparition, my heart gave way, my courage failed me, and I remember nothing more until I recovered consciousness at the setting sun. We left Monsieur Firmin Richard and Monsieur Armand Moncharmin at the moment when they were deciding to look into that little matter of Box 5. "Those people are all making fools of us," Firmin Richard said. "It will be Faust on Saturday. Let us both watch the performance from Box 5 on the Grand Tier." On the Saturday morning, on reaching their office, the joint managers found a letter from O.G. worded in these terms: "My dear managers, so it is to be war between us. If you still care for peace, here is my ultimatum. It consists of the care of the 4 following conditions. 1. You must give me back my private box, and I shall expect to have it at my free disposal from this day forward. 2. The part of Margarita shall be sung tonight by Christine Daille. Never mind about Carlotta. She will be ill. 3. I absolutely insist upon the good and loyal services of Madame Giry, my box-keeper, whom you will reinstate to her functions forthwith. 4. Let me know by a letter handed by Madame Giry, who will see that it reaches me, that you accept, as did your predecessors, the terms of the lease relating to my monthly allowance. I will inform you later how you are to pay it to me. If you refuse, you will give Faust tonight in a house with a curse upon it. Take my advice and be warned in time. O.G. "Look here! I am sick of him! Dead sick of him!" shouted Richard, bringing his fist down on his office table. At that moment the door opened. It must have been deserted by its usual doorkeeper, for Mame Giry entered without ceremony, holding a letter in her hand, and said hurriedly, "I beg your pardon, excuse me, gentlemen, but I had a letter this morning from the opera ghost. He told me to come to you, that you had something to—" She did not complete the sentence. She saw Firmin Richard's face, and a terrible sight it was. He seemed ready to burst. He said nothing. He could not speak. But suddenly he acted. First, his left arm seized upon the quaint person of Mame Giry and made her describe so unexpected a semicircle that she uttered a despairing cry. Next, his right foot imprinted its sole on the black taffeta of a skirt which certainly had never before undergone a similar outrage in a similar place. The thing happened so quickly that Mame Giry, when she found herself outside in the passage, was still quite bewildered and seemed not to understand. Then, suddenly, she understood. And the opera rang with her indignant yells, her violent protests and threats. About the same time, La Carlotta, who had a small house of her own in the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, rang for her maid, who brought her letters to her in bed. Among them there was an anonymous missive, written in red ink, in a hesitating, clumsy hand, which ran, "If you appear tonight, you must be prepared for a great misfortune at the moment when you open your mouth to sing. A misfortune worse than death." The letter took away Carlotta's appetite for breakfast. She pushed back her chocolate, sat up in bed, and thought hard. It was not the first letter of the kind which she had received, but she had never had one couched in such threatening terms. When Carlotta had finished thinking over the threat contained in the strange letter, she got up. "We shall see," she said, adding a few oaths in her native Spanish with a very determined air. Monsieur Richard's private secretary called to ask after the diva's health, and returned with the assurance that she was perfectly well, and that, were she dying, she would sing the part of Margarita that evening. It was 5 o'clock when the post brought her a second anonymous letter in the same hand as the first. It was short and said simply, "You have a bad cold. If you are wise, you will see that it is madness to try and sing tonight." Carlotta sneered, shrugged her handsome shoulders, and sang 2 or 3 notes to reassure herself. The first act passed without incident. The managers in box 5 looked at each other when the curtain fell. "That's one," said Moncharmin. "Yes, the ghost is late," said Firmin Richard. "It's not a bad house," said Moncharmin, "for a house with a curse on it." Monsieur Richard smiled and pointed to a fat, rather vulgar woman, dressed in black, sitting in a stall in the middle of the auditorium, with a man in a broadcloth frock coat on either side of her. "Who on earth are those?" asked Moncharmin. "Those, my dear fellow, are my concierge, her husband, and her brother." "Did you give them their tickets?" "I did. My concierge had never been to the opera. This is the first time, and as she is now going to come every night, I wanted her to have a good seat before spending her time showing other people to theirs." Moncharmin asked what he meant, and Richard answered that he had persuaded his concierge, in whom he had the greatest confidence, to come and take Mame Giry's place for a time. Yes, he would like to see if, with that woman instead of the old lunatic to look after it, box 5 would continue to astonish the nations. Act 2 also finished without incident. The managers left the box during the entr'acte. The first thing they saw on re-entering was a box of English sweets on the little shelf of the ledge. Who had put it there? They asked the box-keepers, but none of them knew. Then they went back to the shelf, and next to the box of sweets found an opera glass. They looked at each other. They had no inclination to laugh. All that Mame Giry had told them returned to their memory, and besides, they seemed to feel a curious kind of draught around them. They sat down in silence. The scene represented Margarita's garden. "Gentle flowers in the dew, be message from me." As she sang these first 2 lines, with her bunch of roses and lilac in her hand. Christine, raising her head, saw Raoul in his box, and from that moment her voice seemed less sure, less crystal clear than usual. Something seemed to deaden and dull her singing. Raoul, behind the curtain of his hands that veiled his boyish tears, thought only of the letter which he received on his return to Paris, where Christine, fleeing from Perros like a thief in the night, had arrived before him. "My dear little playfellow, you must have the courage not to see me again, nor to speak to me again. If you love me just a little, do this for me who will never forget you, my dear Raoul. My life depends upon it. Your life depends upon it. Your little Christine." Thunders of applause. Carlotta made her entrance. She was loudly cheered again as she came to the end of the jewel song. Thenceforth, certain of her voice and her success, fearing nothing, Carlotta flung herself into her part without the least modesty or self-restraint. She was applauded all the more, and her duet with Faust seemed about to bring her a new success, when suddenly a terrible thing happened. Faust had knelt on one knee. "Let me gaze on the form before me, while from yonder ether blue. Look how the star of eve, bright and tender, lingers o'er me, to love thy beauty too." And Margarita replied, "Oh, how strange like a spell does the evening bind me, and a deep languid charm I feel without alarm, with its melody entwined me, and all my heart subdue." At that moment, at that identical moment, the terrible thing happened. Carlotta croaked like a toad. There was consternation on Carlotta's face, and consternation on the faces of all the audience. The two managers in their box could not suppress an exclamation of horror. Everyone felt that the thing was not natural, that there was witchcraft behind it. That toad smelt of brimstone. After some seconds spent in asking herself if she had really heard that infernal noise issue from her throat, she tried to persuade herself that it was not so, that she was the victim of an illusion of the ear, not of treachery on the part of her voice. Meanwhile, in box 5, Moncharmin and Richard had turned very pale. This extraordinary and inexplicable incident filled them with a dread, which was the more awful inasmuch as, for some little time, they had been within the direct influence of the ghost. They had felt his breath. Moncharmin's hair stood on end. Richard wiped the perspiration from his forehead. Yes, the ghost was there, around them, behind them, beside him. They felt his presence without seeing him. They heard his breath, close, close, close to them. They were sure that there were 3 people in the box. What was going to happen? This happened. Carlotta croaked again. Their joint exclamation of horror was heard all over the house. They felt that they were smarting under the ghost's attacks. Leaning over the ledge of their box, they stared at Carlotta as though they did not recognize her. That infernal girl with her croak must have given the signal for some catastrophe. Richard was heard calling to Carlotta in a smothered voice, "Well, go on!" No, Carlotta did not go on. Bravely, heroically, she started afresh on the fatal line at the end of which the toad had appeared. An awful silence succeeded the uproar. Again, Carlotta's voice alone filled the resounding house. "I feel without alarm, with its melody enwind me, and all my heart The house broke into a wild tumult. The 2 managers collapsed in their chairs and dared not even turn round. The ghost was chuckling behind their backs, and at last they distinctly heard his voice in their right ears saying, "She is singing tonight to bring the chandelier down." With one accord, they raised their eyes to the ceiling and uttered a terrible cry. The chandelier, The immense mass of the chandelier was slipping down, coming towards them, at the call of that fiendish voice. Released from its hook, it plunged from the ceiling and came smashing into the middle of the stalls, amid 1,000 shouts of terror. A wild rush for the doors followed. The papers of the day state that there were numbers wounded and 1 killed. The chandelier had crashed down upon the head of the wretched woman who had come to the opera for the first time in her life, the woman whom Monsieur Richard had appointed to succeed Mame Giry, the ghost's box-keeper, in her functions. She was killed on the spot, and the next morning a newspaper appeared with this heading: 200,000 kilos on the head of a concierge. That was her sole epitaph. That tragic evening was a bad one for all concerned. Carlotta fell ill. As for Christine Daae, she disappeared after the performance. A fortnight elapsed, during which she was seen neither at the opera nor outside the opera. Raoul, of course, was the first to be astonished at the young diva's absence. Of whom was Christine Daae the victim? This was the very sensible question which Raoul put to himself as he hurried off to Mamma Valerius, Christine's guardian. He trembled as he rang at a little flat in the Rue Notre-Dame-de-Victoire. The door was opened by the maid, whom he had seen coming out of Christine's dressing-room one evening. "Madame begs Monsieur le Vicomte to excuse her," said the servant. "She can only see him in her bedroom. The poor lady has lost the use of her legs." 5 minutes later, Raoul was ushered into an ill-lit room, where he recognized the good, kind face of Christine's benefactress in the semi-darkness of an alcove. "Monsieur de Chenier," she cried gaily, putting out both her hands to her visitor. "Ah, it's heaven that sends you here. We can talk of her." "Madame, where is Christine?" "She is with her good genius." "What good genius?" "Why, the angel of music." The Vicomte dropped into a chair. "Really? Christine was with the angel of music? You must not tell anybody." "Well, you can rely on me," said Raoul. I know I can," she said with a happy laugh. "But why don't you come near me, as you used to when you were a little boy? I'm very fond of you, Monsieur Raoul. And so is Christine. Very fond of you." "What makes you think that Christine is fond of me, madame?" "She used to speak of you every day." "Really? And what did she tell you?" "She told me that you made her a proposal." And the good old lady began laughing wholeheartedly. Raoul sprang from his chair, flushing to the temples, suffering agonies. "What's this? Where are you going? If you're angry with me for laughing, I beg your pardon. After all, what has happened isn't your fault. Didn't you know? Did you think that Christine was free?" "Is Christine engaged to be married?" "Oh, I know. I know. You know as well as I do that Christine couldn't marry, even if she wanted to." "But I don't know anything about it. And why can't Christine marry?" "Because of the angel of music, of course." "I don't follow." "Yes, he forbids her to—" "He forbids her? The angel of music forbids her to marry?" "It's like this. He tells her that if she got married, she would never hear him again, that's all, and that he would go away forever. So you understand she can't let the angel of music go. It's quite natural." Yes, it's quite natural. "Besides, I thought Christine had told you all that, when she met you at Perros, where she went with her good genius." "Oh, she went to Perros with her good genius, did she?" "That is to say, he arranged to meet her down there, in the churchyard at Perros, by Daae's grave. He promised to play her the Resurrection of Lazarus on her father's violin." "Madam, you will have the goodness to tell me where that genius lives." in heaven." Such simplicity baffled him. He did not know what to say in the presence of this candid and perfect faith in a genius who came down nightly from heaven to haunt the dressing-rooms of the opera. "How long has she known this genius?" "Oh, about 3 months. Yes, it's quite 3 months since he began to give her lessons." The Vicomte threw up his arms with a gesture of despair. "The genius gives her lessons? And where, pray?" "Well, now that she has gone away with him, I can't say. But up to a fortnight ago it was in Christine's dressing-room. It would be impossible in this little flat. The whole house would hear them, whereas at the opera, at 8 o'clock in the morning, there is no one about, you see." "Yes, I see, cried the Vicomte. And he hurriedly took leave of Madame Valerius, who asked herself if the young nobleman was not a little off his head. He walked home to his brother's house in a pitiful state. To think that he had believed in her innocence, in her purity. The angel of music. He knew him now. He saw him. It was, no doubt, some frightful tenor, a good-looking popinjay, who mouthed and simpered as he sang, and she, what a bold and damnably sly creature. His brother was waiting for him, and Raoul fell into his arms like a child. The Count consoled him, without asking for explanations, and told him that the lady of his thoughts had been seen the night before in the company of someone of the other sex in the Bois. She had been seen, it appeared, driving in a brougham, with the window down. There was a glorious moon shining. She was recognized beyond a doubt. As for her companion, only his shadowy outline was seen leaning back in the dark. The carriage was going at a walking pace down a lonely drive behind the grandstand at Longchamp. Raoul found himself by 10 o'clock in the evening in a cab behind the Longchamp racecourse. He told the driver to wait for him at the corner of an avenue and stood stamping his feet to keep warm. He had been indulging in this healthy exercise for half an hour or so when a carriage turned into the road and came quietly in his direction at a walking pace. As it approached, he saw that a woman was leaning her head from the window, and suddenly the moon shed a pale gleam over her features. Christine! The sacred name of his love had sprung from his heart and his lips. He couldn't keep it back. That name, proclaimed in the stillness of the night, had acted as though it was the preconcerted signal for a furious rush on the part of the whole turnout, which dashed past him before he could put into execution his plan of leaping at the horses' heads. The carriage window was raised, and the girl's face had disappeared, and the brougham, behind which he was running, was now no more than a black spot on the white road. His valet found him in the morning, sitting on his bed. He had not undressed, and the servant feared at the sight of his face that some disaster had occurred. Raoul snatched his letters from the man's hands. He had recognized Christine's paper and handwriting. She said, "Dear, go to the masked ball at the opera on the night after tomorrow. At 12 o'clock be in the little room behind the chimney-piece of the big crush-room. Stand near the door that leads to the rotunda. Don't mention this appointment to a living soul. Wear a white domino, and see that you are well masked. As you love me, do not let yourself be recognized. Christine." Raoul no longer knew whether to pity Christine or curse her, and he pitied and cursed her turn and turn about. At all events, he bought a white domino. The hour of the appointment came at last. With his face in a mask, looking a very Pierrot in his white wrap, the Vicomte thought himself most ridiculous. One thought, however, consoled him. He would certainly never be recognized. Crossing the big crush-room and escaping from a mad whirl of dancers in which he was momentarily caught, he at last entered the room mentioned in Christine's letter. The fun here waxed fast and furious. Raoul leaned against a doorpost and waited. He did not wait long. A black domino passed and gave a quick squeeze to the tips of his fingers. He understood that it was she and followed her. "Is that you, Christine?" he asked between his teeth. The black domino turned round promptly and raised her finger to her lips, no doubt to warn him not to mention her name again. As Raoul once more passed through the great crush-room, this time in the wake of his guide, he could not help noticing a group crowding round a person whose disguise, eccentric air, and cadaverous appearance were causing a sensation. It was a man dressed all in scarlet, with a huge hat and feathers on the top of a wonderful death's head. From his shoulders hung an immense red velvet cloak, which trailed along the floor like a king's train, and on this cloak was embroidered in gold letters, "Touch me not. I am Red Death stalking abroad." Raoul passed in front of the funereal masquerader, who had just happened to turn in his direction, and he nearly exclaimed, "The death's head of Perros!" He had recognized him. He wanted to dart forwards, forgetting Christine, but the black domino caught him by the arm and dragged him from the crush room, far from the mad crowd through which Deathhead was stalking. They went up 2 floors. Here the stairs and corridors were almost deserted. The black domino opened the door of a private box and beckoned to the white domino to follow her. Then Christine, whom he now knew by the sound of her voice, closed the door behind them and warned him in a whisper to remain at the back of the box and on no account to show himself. Then she opened the door ajar, looked out into the corridor, and in a low voice said, "He must have gone up higher." Suddenly she exclaimed, "He's coming down again." She tried to close the door, but Raoul prevented her, for he had seen on the top step of the staircase that led to the floor above a red foot, followed by another, and slowly, majestically, the whole scarlet dress of Red Death met his eyes. And he once more saw the death's head of Perros. "It's he!" he exclaimed. "This time he shall not escape me." But Christine had slammed the door. "What do you mean?" she asked in a changed voice. "Who shall not escape you?" "Why, he! The man who hides behind that hideous mask of death, the evil genius of the churchyard of Perros, Red Death. In a word, madam, your friend, your angel of music. But I shall snatch off his mask, and this time we shall look each other in the face, and I shall know whom you love and who loves you." With a tragic gesture, she flung out her 2 arms, fixing a barrier of white flesh against the door. "In the name of our love, Raoul, you shall not pass." "You lie, madam, for you do not love me, and you've never loved me. You've driven me mad. When I think that I had only one object in life, to give my name to an opera wench. Raoul, how can you—" "I shall die of shame." "No, dear. Live," said Christine in a grave and breaking voice. And goodbye. Goodbye, Raoul. I came to tell you, dear, but I cannot tell you now. You would not believe me. You have lost faith in me, Raoul. It is finished." She spoke in such a despairing voice that the lad began to feel remorse for his cruelty. "But look here," he cried. "Can't you tell me what all this means? You are free. There is no one to interfere with you. You go about Paris, you put on a domino to come to the ball. Why do you not go home? What have you been doing this past fortnight? What is this tale about the angel of music, which you've been telling Valerius? Christine, I beg of you. What is this farce?" Christine simply took off her mask and said, "Dear, it is a tragedy." Raoul now saw her face, and could not restrain an exclamation of surprise and terror. The fresh complexion of former days was gone. A mortal pallor covered those features, which he had known so charming and so gentle. "My dearest, my dearest," he moaned, holding out his arms. "Forgive me. Perhaps, some day, perhaps," she said, resuming her mask, and she went away, forbidding him with a gesture to follow her. He watched her till she was out of sight. Then he also went down among the crowd, hardly knowing what he was doing, with throbbing temples and an aching heart. He turned down the passage behind the scenes that led to Christine Daae's dressing room. He tapped at the door. There was no answer. He entered. The room was empty. A gas jet was burning, turned down low. He saw some letter paper on a little desk. He thought of writing to Christine, but he heard steps in the passage. He'd only time to hide in the inner room, which was separated from the dressing room by a curtain. Christine entered, took off her mask with a weary movement and flung it on the table. She sighed and let her pretty head fall into her two hands. What was she thinking of? Of Raoul? No, for Raoul heard her murmur, "Poor Eric." At first he thought he must be mistaken. What had this Eric to do with Christine's sighs? And why was she pitying Eric when Raoul was so unhappy? Christine began to write, deliberately, calmly, and so placidly, that Raoul, who was still trembling from the effects of the tragedy that separated them, was painfully impressed. What coolness, he said to himself. She wrote on, filling 2, 3, 4 sheets. Suddenly she raised her head and hid the sheets in her bodice. She seemed to be listening. Raoul also listened. A faint singing seemed to issue from the walls. The song became plainer. The words were now distinguishable. He heard a voice, a very beautiful, very soft, very captivating voice. But for all its softness, it remained a male voice. The voice came nearer and nearer, and now the voice was in the room, in front of Christine. Christine rose and addressed the voice as though speaking to someone beside her. "Here I am, Eric," she said. "I am ready, but you are late." Raoul, peeping from behind the curtain, could not believe his eyes, which showed him nothing. Christine's face lit up. A smile of happiness appeared upon her bloodless lips. The voice without a body went on singing. And certainly Raoul had never in his life heard anything more absolutely and heroically sweet, more powerful, in short, more irresistibly triumphant. The voice was singing the wedding night song from Romeo and Juliet. Raoul saw Christine stretch out her arms to the voice as she had done in the churchyard at Perros, to the invisible violin playing the resurrection of Lazarus, and nothing could describe the passion with which the voice sang. "Fate links thee to me forever and a day." The strains went through Raoul's heart. Struggling against the charm that seemed to deprive him of all his will and all his energy, he succeeded in drawing back the curtain that hid him. She herself was moving to the back of the room, the whole wall of which was occupied by a great mirror that reflected her image. Christine walked toward her image in the glass, and the image came toward her. The two Christines, the real one and the reflection, ended by touching, and Raoul put out his arms to clasp the two in one embrace. But, by a sort of dazzling miracle that sent him staggering, Raoul was suddenly flung back, while an icy blast swept across his face. He saw not 2, but 4, 8, 20 Christines spinning round him, laughing at him, and fleeing so swiftly that he couldn't touch one of them. At last, everything stood still, and he saw himself in the glass. But Christine had disappeared. He rushed up to the glass. He struck at the walls. Nobody. And meanwhile the room still echoed with a distant, passionate singing. "Fate links thee to me forever and a day." Which way? Which way had Christine gone? Which way would she return? Would she return? Then, worn out, beaten, empty-brained, he sat down on the chair which Christine had just left. Like her, he let his head fall into his hands. When he raised it, the tears were streaming down his young cheeks. "Who is this Eric?" he said. The day after Christine had vanished before his eyes in a sort of dazzling whirl, Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny called to inquire at Mamma Valerius's. He came upon a charming picture. Christine herself was seated by the bedside of the old lady, who was sitting up against her pillows knitting. The pink and white had returned to the young girl's cheeks. Raoul no longer recognized the tragic face of the day before. She rose without showing any emotion and offered him her hand. But Raoul's stupefaction was so great that he stood there dumbfounded, without a gesture, without a word. "Well, Monsieur de Chagny," exclaimed Mamma Valerius, "don't you know our Christine? Her good genius has sent her back to us." "Mamma, this cannot interest Monsieur de Chagny." "On the contrary, mademoiselle," said the young man in a voice which he tried to make firm and brave, but which still trembled. "I have been your friend too long not to be alarmed. With Madame Valerius at a disastrous adventure which will certainly end by making you its victim, Christine." At these words, Mamma Valerius tossed about in her bed. What does this mean?" she cried. "You must tell me everything, Christine. Why did you try to reassure me? And what danger is it, Monsieur de Chagny?" "An impostor is abusing her good faith." "Is the angel of music an impostor?" "There is a terrible mystery around us, madame, around you, around Christine. A mystery much more dreadful than any number of ghosts or genii." Mamma Valerius turned a terrified face to Christine, who had already run to her adopted mother and was holding her in her arms. "Don't believe him, Mummy. Don't believe him," she repeated. "Then tell me that you will never leave me again," implored the widow. Christine was silent, and Raoul resumed, "That is what you must promise, Christine. It is the only thing that can reassure your mother and me." "I am mistress of my own actions, Monsieur de Chagny. You have no right to control them. As to what I have done during the last fortnight, there is only one man in the world who has the right to demand an account of me, my husband. Well, I have no husband, and I never mean to marry." She threw out her hands to emphasize her words, and Raoul turned pale, not only because of the words of which he had heard, but because he had caught sight of a plain gold ring on Christine's finger. "You have no husband, and yet you wear a wedding ring." "That is a present," she said, vainly striving to hide her embarrassment. "Christine, as you have no husband, that ring can only have been given by one who hopes to make you his wife. I saw your ecstasy at the sound of the voice, Christine, the voice that came from the wall of the next room to yours. Yes, your ecstasy. Why did you stand up with radiant features as though you were really hearing angels? Come, Christine, the name of the man. The name of the man who had the audacity to put a ring on your finger." "Monsieur de Chagny," the girl declared coldly, "you shall never know." Thereupon, seeing the hostile manner in which her ward addressed the Vicomte, Mamma Valerius suddenly took Christine's part. "And if she does love that man, Monsieur le Vicomte, even then it is no business of yours." "Alas, madame, I believe that Christine really does love him. But what I am not certain of, madame, is that the man whom Christine loves is worthy of her love." "Raoul, why do you condemn a man whom you've never seen, whom no one knows, and about whom you yourself know nothing?" "Yes, Christine. Yes, I at least know the name which you thought to keep from me forever. The name of your angel of music, mademoiselle, is Eric." "Who told you?" "You yourself." "How do you mean?" "By pitying him the other night, the night of the masked ball. When you went to your dressing-room, did you not say, 'Poor Eric'? Well, Christine, there was a poor Raoul who overheard you." "Raoul, forget the man's voice and do not even remember its name. You must never try to fathom the mystery of the man's voice." "Is the mystery so very terrible?" "There is no more awful mystery on this earth. Swear to me that you will never come to my dressing-room again unless I send for you." Then you promise to send for me sometimes, Christine? I promise. When? Tomorrow. Then I swear to do as you ask. He kissed her hands and went away, cursing Eric and resolving to be patient. The next day he saw her at the opera. She was still wearing the plain gold ring. She was gentle and kind to him. She talked to him of the plans which he was forming, of his future, of his career. He told her that he would be leaving France in 3 weeks, or a month at the latest. So, in a month we shall have to say goodbye, forever. Unless, Christine, we pledge our faith and wait for each other forever. She put her hand to his mouth. Hush, Raoul. You know there's no question of that. And we shall never be married. That is understood. She seemed suddenly almost unable to contain an overpowering gaiety. Raoul stared at her in amazement. But, she continued, holding out her 2 hands to Raoul, but if we cannot be married, we can be engaged. Nobody will know but ourselves, Raoul. There have been plenty of secret marriages. Why not a secret engagements? We are engaged, dear, for a month. In a month, you will go away, and I can be happy at the thought of that month all my life long. Then she became serious again. This, she said, is a happiness that will harm no one. Raoul jumped at the idea. He bowed to Christine and said, Mademoiselle, I have the honor to ask for your hand. Why, you have both of them already, my dear. Oh, Raoul, how happy we shall be. We must play at being engaged from morning till night. It was the prettiest game in the world, and they enjoyed it like the children that they were. One day, about a week after the game began, Raoul's heart was badly hurt. Mamma Valerius told him that Christine had gone away for 2 days. She had left at 5 o'clock the day before. Raoul was distracted. He hated Mamma Valerius for giving him such news as that with such stupefying calmness. Christine returned on the following day. She returned in triumph. She renewed her extraordinary success of the gala performance. The Vicomte, who of course was present, was the only one to suffer on hearing the 1,000 echoes of this fresh triumph, for Christine still wore her plain gold ring. A distant voice whispered in the young man's ear, She is wearing the ring again tonight, and you did not give it to her. She gave her soul again tonight, and did not give it to you. If she will not tell you what she's been doing these last 2 days, you must go and ask Eric. He ran behind the scenes and placed himself in her way. She saw him, for her eyes were looking for him. She said, Quick, quick, come! And she dragged him to her dressing room. She let her tears flow. They kissed like a despairing brother and sister who meet to mourn a dead parent. Tomorrow, my dear betrothed, and be happy, Raoul. I sang for you tonight. He returned the next day. She said, Come for a walk, dear. The air will do you good. Raoul thought that she would propose a stroll in the country, far from that building which he detested as a prison whose jailer he could feel walking within the walls, the jailer, Eric. But she took him to the stage, and made him sit on the wooden curb of a well in the doubtful peace and coolness of a first scene set for the evening's performance. On another day, she wandered with him hand in hand along the deserted paths of a garden whose creepers had been cut out by a decorator's skilful hands. It was as though the real sky, the real flowers, the real earth were forbidden her for all time, and she condemned to breathe no other air than that of the theatre. The precious days sped in this way. Sometimes her eyes seemed to pursue imaginary shadows. She cried, This way, and this way, and this way, laughing a breathless laugh that often ended in tears. Once, when they were passing before an open trapdoor on the stage, Raoul stooped over the dark cavity and said, "You've shown me over the upper part of your empire, Christine, but there are strange stories told of the lower part. Shall we go down?" She caught him in her arms, as though she feared to see him disappear down the black hole, and in a trembling voice whispered, "Never! I will not have you go there, never. Besides, it's not mine. Everything that is underground belongs to him." "So he lives down there, does he?" "I never said so. Who told you a thing like that? Come away. I sometimes wonder if you're quite sane, Raoul. You always take things in such an impossible way. Come along, come." And she literally dragged him away, for he was obstinate and wanted to remain by the trapdoor. That hole attracted him. Suddenly the trapdoor was closed, and so quickly that they did not even see the hand that worked it, and they remained quite dazed. On the following days, Christine was careful to avoid the trapdoors. Her agitation increased as the hours passed. At last, one afternoon, she arrived very late, with her face so desperately pale that Raoul blurted out that he would not leave France unless she first told him the secret of the man's voice. "Hush! Hush, in heaven's name! Suppose he heard you!" "I will remove you from his power, Christine, I swear it, and you shall not think of him any more." "Oh, is it possible?" She allowed herself this doubt, which was an encouragement, while dragging the young man up to the topmost floor of the theatre, far, far from the trapdoors. He had a difficulty in following her. They were soon under the very roof, in the maze of timber-work. They slipped through the buttresses, the rafters, the joists, and, despite the care which she took to look behind her at every moment, she failed to see a shadow which followed her like her own shadow, which stopped when she stopped, which started again when she did, and which made no more noise than a well-conducted shadow should. As for Raoul, he saw nothing either, for, when he had Christine in front of him, nothing interested him that happened behind. In this way they reached the roof. Christine tripped over it as lightly as a swallow. The shadow had followed behind them, clinging to their steps, and they little suspected its presence when they at last sat down, trustingly, under the mighty protection of Apollo, who, with a great bronze gesture, lifted his huge lyre to the heart of a crimson sky. Christine gave a sigh, to which it seemed to her that another sigh behind her replied. "Didn't you hear?" Her teeth chattered. "No," said Raoul, "I heard nothing." "It is too terrible to be always trembling like this. And yet we run no danger here. We're at home, in the sky, in the open air, in the light. I've never seen him by daylight. It must be awful. Well, the first time I saw him, I thought that he was going to die." "Why?" asked Raoul, really frightened at the aspect which this strange confidence was taking. "Because I had seen him." "Tell me how you saw him first." "I had heard him for 3 months without seeing him. The first time I heard it, I thought, as you did, that that adorable voice was singing in another room. I went out and looked everywhere, but, as you know, Raoul, my dressing room is a long way from the others. I couldn't find the voice outside my room, whereas it went on steadily inside. And it not only sang, but it spoke to me, and answered my questions, like a real man's voice, with this difference, that it was as beautiful as the voice of an angel. From that time onward, the voice and I became great friends. It asked leave to give me lessons every day. I agreed, and never failed to keep the appointments which it gave me in my dressing room. You have no idea, though you've heard the voice, of what those lessons were like." "No, I have no idea," said Raoul. "What was your accompaniment?" "We were accompanied by music which I do not know. It was behind the wall and wonderfully accurate. The voice seemed to understand mine exactly, to know precisely where my father had left off teaching me. In a few weeks' time, I hardly knew myself when I sang. It was then that I saw you for the first time one evening in the audience. I was so glad that I never thought of concealing my delight when I reached my dressing room. Unfortunately, the voice was there before me, and soon noticed by my air that something had happened. It asked what was the matter. I saw no reason for keeping our story secret, or concealing the place which you filled in my heart. Then the voice was silent. I called to it, but it did not reply. I begged and entreated, but in vain. I was terrified lest it had gone for good. I wish to heaven it had, dear. The next day I went back to my dressing room in a very pensive frame of mind. The voice was there, spoke to me with great sadness, and told me plainly that if I must bestow my heart on earth, there was nothing for the voice to do but to go back to heaven. I feared nothing so much as that I might never hear it again. I thought about my love for you and realized that your position in society forbade me to contemplate the possibility of ever marrying you. And I swore to the voice that you were no more to me than a brother, nor ever would be, and that my heart was incapable of an earthly love. And that, dear, was why I refused to recognize or see you when I met you on the stage or in the passages. Meanwhile, the hours during which the voice taught me were spent in a divine frenzy, until at last the voice said to me, "You can now, Christine Dye, give to men a little of the music of heaven." I don't know how it was that Carlotta did not come to the theatre that night, but I sang with a rapture I never felt before, and I felt for a moment as if my soul were leaving my body. "Oh, Christine," said Raoul, "my heart quivered that night at every accent of your voice. I saw the tears stream down your cheeks, and I wept with you." "I felt myself fainting," said Christine. "I closed my eyes. When I opened them, you were by my side. But the voice was also there, Raoul. I was afraid for your sake, and again I would not recognize you, and I began to laugh when you reminded me that you'd picked up my scarf in the sea. Alas, there's no deceiving the voice. The voice recognized you, and the voice was jealous. You remember the terrible evening when Carlotta thought that she'd been turned into a toad on the stage, and when the house was suddenly plunged into darkness through the chandelier crashing to the floor? Well, they were killed and wounded that night, and the whole theatre rang with terrified screams. My first thought was for you and the voice, and I was at once easy where you were concerned, for I had seen you in your brother's box, and I knew that you were not in danger. But the voice had told me that it would be at the performance, and I was really afraid for it, just as if it had been an ordinary person who was capable of dying. I rushed to my room, and the voice was not there. I locked my door, and with tears in my eyes besought it, if it were still alive, to manifest itself to me. The voice did not reply, but suddenly I heard a long, beautiful wail which I knew well. It was the plaint of Lazarus, when, at the sound of the Redeemer's voice, he begins to open his eyes and see the light of day. It was the music which you and I, Raoul, heard at Pyros. I cannot tell you the effect which that music had upon me. It seemed to command me, personally, to come, to stand up, to come to it. It retreated, and I followed. "Come and believe in me." I believed in it. I came, and this was the extraordinary thing, in my dressing room. As I moved, it seemed to lengthen out, to lengthen out. Evidently, it must have been an effect of mirrors, for I had the mirror in front of me, and suddenly I was outside the room without knowing why or how. What? Without knowing how? Oh, Christine, you should really stop dreaming. I was not dreaming, dear. I was outside my room without knowing how. You, who saw me disappear from my room one evening, may be able to explain it, but I cannot. I can only tell you that suddenly I was in a dark passage. I was frightened, and I cried out. It was quite dark, but for a faint red glimmer in a distant angle of the wall. And suddenly a hand was laid on mine, or rather a stone-cold, bony thing that seized my wrist and didn't let go. I cried out. I was dragged towards the little red light, and then I saw that I was in the hands of a man wrapped in a large cloak and wearing a mask that hid his whole face. I made one last effort. My limbs stiffened, my mouth opened to scream, but a hand closed it. A hand which I felt on my lips, on my skin. A hand that smelt of death. And then I fainted away. When I opened my eyes, we were on the edge of a lake. whose leaden waters stretched into the distance, into the darkness. But a blue light lit up the bank, and I saw a little boat fastened to an iron on the wharf. A boat? Yes. But I knew that all that existed, and that there was nothing supernatural about that underground lake and boat. But my terror began all over again. My gruesome escort rowed with a quick, powerful stroke, and his eyes under the mask never left me. We slipped across the noiseless water into the bluey light of which I told you. Then we were in the dark again, and we touched shore, and I was once more taken up in the man's arms. I cried aloud, and then, suddenly, I was silent, dazed by the light. I was in the middle of a drawing-room that seemed to me to be decorated with nothing but flowers, cut flowers, magnificent and stupid, because of the silk ribbons that tied them into baskets. And in the midst of all these flowers stood the black shape of the man in the mask, with arms crossed, and said, "Don't be afraid, Christine. You are in no danger." It was the voice. My rage equaled my amazement. I rushed at the mask and tried to snatch it away so as to see the face of the voice. The man said, "You are in no danger so long as you do not touch the mask." And taking me gently by the wrists, he forced me into a chair, and then went down on his knees before me and said no more. I felt that I had to do with some terrible, eccentric person who had mysteriously succeeded in taking up his abode there under the opera house, 5 stories below the level of the ground, and the voice was on its knees before me. It was a man, and I began to cry. The man, still kneeling, must have understood the cause of my tears, for he said, "It is true, Christine. I am not an angel, nor a genius, nor a ghost. I am Eric." Christine's narrative was again interrupted. An echo behind them seemed to repeat the word after her. Eric. What echo? They both turned round and saw that night had fallen. Raoul made a movement as though to rise, but Christine kept him beside her. "Don't go," she said. "I want you to know everything here." Christine, Christine, something tells me we are wrong to wait till tomorrow evening, and we ought to fly at once. I tell you that if he does not hear me sing tomorrow, it will cause him infinite pain. It is difficult not to cause him pain, and yet to escape from him for good. You're right in that, Raoul. For certainly he will die of my flight. But then it counts both ways, for we risk his killing us. Does he love you so much? He would commit murder for me. "Oh, I hate him!" cried Raoul. "And you, Christine? Tell me, do you hate him too?" "No," said Christine simply. "He fills me with horror, but I do not hate him." How can I hate him, Raoul? Think of Eric at my feet in the house on the lake underground. He accuses himself, he curses himself, he implores my forgiveness. He lays at my feet an immense and tragic love. He's carried me off for love. He has imprisoned me with him underground for love. But he respects me. He crawls, he moans, he weeps. And when I stood up, Raoul, and told him that I could only despise him if he did not then and there give me my liberty, he offered it. He offered to show me the mysterious road. Only he rose too. And I was made to remember that, though he was not an angel, nor a ghost, nor a genius, he remained the voice, for he sang. And I listened and stayed. That night we did not exchange another word. He sang me to sleep. When I woke up, I was alone. lying on a sofa in a simply furnished little bedroom. I saw on the chest of drawers a note in red ink, which said, "My dear Christine, you need have no concern as to your fate. You have no better friend in the world than myself. You are alone at present in this home which is yours. I am going to buy you all the things that you can need." I felt sure that I had fallen into the hands of a madman. I ran around my little apartment, looking for a way to escape, but could find none. After giving 3 taps against the wall, he walked in quietly through a door which I had not noticed, and which he left open. He had his arms full of boxes and parcels and arranged them on the bed in a leisurely fashion, while I loaded him with abuse and called upon him to take off his mask if it covered the face of an honest man. He replied serenely, "You shall never see Eric's face," and he reproached me with not having finished dressing at that time of day. He was good enough to tell me that it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, after which he asked me to come to the dining room where a nice lunch was waiting for us. I was very hungry. I slammed the door in his face and went to the bathroom. When I came out again, Eric said that he loved me, but that he would never tell me so except when I gave him leave, and that the rest of the time would be spent in music. "What do you mean by the rest of the time?" I asked. 5 days, he said with decision. I asked him if I should then be free, and he said, "You will be free, Christine, for when those 5 days are past, you will have learned not to fear me, and then from time to time you will come back to see your poor Eric." After lunch he rose and gave me the tips of his fingers, for he said he would like to show me the other rooms. But I snatched away my hand and gave a cry. What I had touched was both moist and, at the same time, bony, and I remembered that his hands smelt of death. "Oh, forgive me," he moaned, and he opened a door before me. "This is my room, if you care to see it. It is rather curious." I felt as if I were entering a mortuary chamber. In the middle of the room was a canopy from which hung curtains of red brocaded stuff, and under the canopy an open coffin. "That is where I sleep," said Eric. "One has to get used to everything in life, even to eternity." Then I saw the keyboard of an organ which filled one whole side of the wall. On the desk was a music book covered with red notes. I asked leave to look at it, and on the first page read, "Don Juan Triumphant." "Yes," he said, "I compose sometimes. I began that work 20 years ago. When I have finished, I shall take it away with me in that coffin and never wake up again." Suddenly, I felt a need to see beneath the mask. I wanted to know the face of the voice, and with a movement which I was utterly unable to control, swiftly my fingers tore away the mask. Oh, horror, horror, horror! Christine stopped at the thought of the vision which had scared her, while the echoes of the night which had repeated the name of Eric now thrice moaned the cry, "Horror, horror, horror!" Raoul and Christine, clasping each other closely, raised their eyes to the stars that shone in a clear and peaceful sky. She took Raoul's protecting hands in hers, and with a long shiver continued, "Yes, if I live to be 100, I shall always hear the superhuman cry of grief and rage which he uttered when the terrible sight appeared before my eyes. Raoul, you have seen death's heads when they have been dried and withered by the ages, and you saw Red Death stalking about at the last masked ball. Imagine, if you can, Red Death's mask suddenly coming to life in order to express, with the 4 black holes of its eyes, its nose, and its mouth, the extreme anger, the mighty fury of a demon, and not a ray of light from the sockets. For, as I learned later, you cannot see his blazing eyes except in the dark. I fell back against the wall, and he came up to me, grinding his teeth hideously. and as I fell upon my knees he hissed mad, incoherent words and curses at me. Leaning over me, he cried, "Look! You want to see? See? Feast your eyes! Glut your soul on my cursed ugliness! Look at Eric's face! Now you know the face of the voice. You were not content to hear me, eh? You wanted to know what I looked like. Well, are you satisfied? I'm a good-looking fellow, eh? When a woman has seen me as you have, she belongs to me. She loves me forever. I'm a kind of Don Juan, you know. Look at me. I am Don Juan triumphant. And when I turned away my head and begged for mercy, he drew my head back to him brutally, twisting his dead fingers into my hair. "Enough! Enough!" cried Raoul. "I will kill him. In heaven's name, Christine, tell me where the dining room on the lake is. I must kill him." "Oh, Raoul, listen, listen." He dragged me by my hair, and then he hissed at me. "I frighten you, do I? Perhaps you think that I have another mask, eh? And that this, my head, is a mask? Well," he roared, "tear it off as you did the other!" And he seized my hands and dug them into his awful face. He tore his flesh with my nails, tore his terrible dead flesh with my nails. "No!" he shouted. "Know that I am built up of death from head to foot, and that it is a corpse that loves you and adores you, and will never, never leave you. Look, I am not laughing now. I am crying for you, Christine, who have torn off my mask and who have therefore can never leave me again. As long as you thought me handsome, you would have come back. But now that you know my hideousness, you would run away for good, so I can keep you here. Why did you want to see me? Oh, mad Christine, who wanted to see me, when my own father never saw me, and when my mother, so as not to see me, presented me with my first mask." He'd let go of me at last, and was now dragging himself about on the floor, uttering terrible sobs. And then he went into his room, closed the door, and left me alone to my reflections. Presently I heard the sound of the organ. His Don Juan triumphant seemed to me at first one awful, long, magnificent sob. But little by little it expressed every emotion, every suffering of which mankind is capable. It intoxicated me, and I opened the door that separated us. Eric rose as I entered, but dared not turn in my direction. "Eric," I cried, "show me your face without fear. I swear that you are the most unhappy and sublime of men, and if ever again I shiver when I look at you, it will be because I am thinking of the splendor of your genius." Then Eric turned round, for he believed me, and I also, alas, had faith in myself. He fell at my feet with words of love in his dead mouth. He kissed the hem of my dress, and did not see that I closed my eyes. What more can I tell you, dear? You now know the tragedy. It went on for a fortnight during which I lied to him. My lies were as hideous as the monster who inspired them, but they were the price of my liberty. Gradually I gave him such confidence that he ventured to take me walking on the banks of the lake and to row me in the boat on its leaden waters. Towards the end of my captivity, he let me out through the gates that close the underground passages in the Rue Scribe. Here a carriage awaited us, and took us to the Bois. The night when we met you was nearly fatal to me, for he is terribly jealous of you, and I had to tell him that you were soon going away. Then, at last, after a fortnight of this horrible captivity, during which I was filled with pity, enthusiasm, despair, and horror by turns, he believed me when I said, "I will come back." "And you went back, Christine?" groaned Raoul. "Yes, dear. And I must tell you that it was not his frightful threats when setting me free that helped me to keep my word, but the harrowing sob which he gave on the threshold of the tomb. Poor Eric. Poor Eric." "Christine," said Raoul, rising, "you tell me that you love me, but you had recovered your liberty hardly a few hours before you returned to Eric. Remember the masked ball?" "Yes, and remember that those few hours I passed with you, Raoul, to the great danger of both of us." "I doubted your love for me during those hours." "Do you doubt it still, Raoul?" She put her two trembling arms around the young man's neck and said, "Oh, my betrothed of a day, if I did not love you, I would not give you my lips. Take them for the first time and the last." He kissed her lips, but the night that surrounded them was rent asunder, as at the approach of a storm, and their eyes, filled with dread of Eric, showed them high up above an immense night bird that stared at them with its blazing eyes and seemed to cling to the strings of Apollo's lyre. Raoul and Christine ran and ran, eager to escape from the roof and the blazing eyes that showed only in the dark, and they did not stop before they came to the 8th floor on the way down. Suddenly, a queer-looking form stood before them and blocked the road. "No, not this way." And the form pointed to another passage by which they were to reach the wings. Raoul wanted to stop and ask for an explanation, but the form, which wore a sort of long frock-coat and pointed cap, said, "Quick, go away quickly." Christine was already dragging Raoul along, compelling him to start running again. "But who is he? Who is that man?" he asked. Christine replied, "It's the Persian." "Well, what's he doing here?" "I don't know. He's always in the opera." They came to Christine's dressing room. "Why do you think that you are safer in this room than on the stage?" asked Raoul. "You heard him through the walls, therefore he can hear us." "No. He gave me his word not to be behind the walls of my dressing room again, and I believe Eric's word. This room and my bedroom on the lake are for me exclusively, and not to be approached by him." "How can you have gone from this room into the dark passage, Christine? Suppose we try to repeat your movement, shall we?" "It's dangerous, dear, for the glass might carry me off again, and instead of running away I should be obliged to go to the end of the secret passage, to the lake, and there call Eric." "Would he hear you?" "Eric will hear me wherever I call him. He told me so. He's a very curious genius. You must not think, Raoul, that he is simply a man who amuses himself by living underground. He does things that no other man could do. He knows things which nobody in the world knows." "Take care, Christine. You're making a ghost of him again." No, he's not a ghost. He's a man of heaven and earth, that is all." "A man of heaven and earth, that is all? A nice way to speak of him. And are you still resolved to run away from him?" "Yes, tomorrow." "I shall be here at 12 o'clock tomorrow night. I shall keep my promise, whatever happens. You say that after listening to the performance he is to wait for you in the dining room on the lake?" "Yes." "And how are you to reach him, if you don't know how to go out by the glass?" Christine opened a box, took out an enormous key, and showed it to Raoul. "What's that?" he asked. "The key of the gate to the underground passage in the Rue Scribe." "I understand, Christine. It leads straight to the lake. Give it to me, Christine, will you?" "Never," she said. "That would be treachery." Suddenly, Christine changed colour. A mortal pallor overspread her features. "Oh, heavens," she cried. "Eric! Eric! Have pity on me." "Hold your tongue," said Raoul. "You told me he could not hear you." But the singer's attitude became more and more inexplicable. She wrung her fingers, repeating with a distraught air, "Oh, heaven! Oh, heaven!" "But what is it? What is it?" Raoul implored. "The ring! The gold ring he gave me." "Oh, so Eric gave you that ring?" "You know he did, Raoul. But what you don't know is that when he gave it to me, he said, 'I give you back your liberty, Christine, on condition that this ring is always on your finger. As long as you keep it, you will be protected against all danger, and Eric will remain your friend. But woe to you if ever you part with it, for Eric will have his revenge.'" My dear, the ring is gone. It was while I gave you that kiss, up above under Apollo's lyre. The ring must have slipped from my finger and dropped into the street. We can never find it. Oh, and what misfortunes are in store for us now. Oh, to run away." "Let us run away at once," Raoul insisted once more. She hesitated. He thought that she was going to say yes. Then her bright pupils became dimmed, and she said, "No, tomorrow." And she left him hurriedly, still ringing and rubbing her fingers as though she hoped to bring the ring back like that. Raoul went home, greatly perturbed at all that he had heard. "If I don't save her from the hands of that humbug," he said aloud as he went to bed, "she is lost. But I will save her." At breakfast, the early morning breakfast which the Count took in his study, Philippe sent for his brother. Raoul arrived silent and gloomy. Philippe handed his brother a copy of the Epoque and said, "Read that." The Vicomte read, "The latest news is that there is a promise of marriage between Mademoiselle Christine Daae, the opera singer, and Monsieur le Vicomte Raoul de Chagny. If the gossips are to be believed, Count Philippe has sworn that for the first time on record the Chagnys shall not keep their promise. But, as love is all-powerful, we wonder how Count Philippe intends to prevent the Vicomte, his brother, from leading the new Margarita to the altar. The two brothers are said to adore each other, but the Count is curiously mistaken if he imagines that brotherly love will triumph over love pure and simple." "You see, Raoul," said the Count, "you are making us ridiculous. That little girl has turned your head with her ghost stories." The Vicomte had evidently repeated Christine's narrative to his brother during the night. All that he now said was, "Goodbye, Philippe. Have you made up your mind? You're going tonight with her?" No reply. "Surely you would not do anything so foolish." "Mind you, I shall know how to prevent you." "Goodbye, Philippe," the Vicomte repeated, and left the room. This scene was described to the examining magistrate by the Count himself, who did not see Raoul again until that evening at the opera, a few minutes before Christine's disappearance. They were giving Faust, as it happens, to a splendid house. The paragraph in that morning's Epoque had already produced its effect, for all eyes were turned to the box in which Count Philippe sat alone, apparently in a very indifferent and careless frame of mind. The feminine element in the brilliant audience seemed curiously puzzled, and the Vicomte's absence gave rise to any amount of whispering behind the fans. Christine Daae met with a rather cold reception. That very special audience could not forgive her for aiming so high. The singer noticed this unfavourable attitude of a portion of the house and was confused by it. She trembled. She felt on the verge of a breakdown. Just then, Carlotta made her entrance in a box facing the stage, a sensational entrance. Poor Christine recognized her rival. She thought that she saw a sneer on her lips. That saved her. She forgot everything in order to triumph once more. From that moment, the prima donna sang with all her heart and soul. In the last act, when she began the invocation to the angels, she made all the members of the audience feel as though they too had wings. In the center of the amphitheater, a man stood up and remained standing, facing the singer. It was Raoul. "Holy angel, in heaven blessed." And Christine, her arms outstretched, her throat filled with music, the glory of her hair falling over her bare shoulders, uttered the divine cry, "My spirit longs with thee to rest." It was at this moment that the stage was suddenly plunged into darkness. It happened so quickly that the spectators hardly had time to utter a sound of stupefaction, for the gas at once lit the stage again. But Christine Daae was no longer there. Men rushed from the wings to the spot where Christine had been singing that very instant. The performance was interrupted amidst the greatest disorder. Raoul hurriedly left his seat. The Count disappeared from his box, and the curtain was lowered. Behind the curtain there was an indescribable crowd. Artists, scene-shifters, dancers, supers, choristers, subscribers were all asking questions, shouting and hustling one another. "Well, what's become of her? She ran away with the Vicomte de Chagny, of course. No, with the Count. Ah, here's Carlotta. Carlotta did the trick. No, it was a ghost." And a few laughed, especially as a careful examination of the trapdoors and boards had put the idea of an accident out of the question. Raoul's first thought, after Christine Daae's fantastic disappearance, was to accuse Eric. He no longer doubted the almost supernatural powers of the Angel of Music in this domain of the opera where he had set up his empire. And Raoul rushed onto the stage in a mad fit of love and despair. "Christine! Christine!" he moaned, calling to her as he felt that she must be calling to him from the depths of that dark pit in which the monster had carried her. "Christine! Christine!" And he seemed to hear the girl's screams through the frail boards that separated him from her. He bent forward. He listened. He wandered over the stage like a madman. People pushed him aside, laughing. They thought the poor lover's brain was gone. Hideous thoughts flashed through Raoul's congested mind. Of course, Eric must have discovered their secret, must have known that Christine had played him false. What a vengeance would be his. Such were the thoughts that haunted Raoul as he ran to the singer's dressing room. "Christine! Christine!" Bitter tears scorched the boy's eyelids as he saw scattered over the furniture the clothes which his beautiful bride was to have worn at the hour of their flight. Oh, why had she refused to leave earlier? Why had she delayed? Raoul, his throat filled with sobs, oaths, and insults, fumbled awkwardly at the great mirror that had opened one night before his eyes to let Christine pass to the murky dwelling below. He pushed, pressed, groped about, but the glass apparently obeyed no one but Eric. Suddenly, Raoul remembered something about a gate opening into the Rue Scribe, an underground passage running straight from the Rue Scribe to the lake. Yes, Christine had told him about that, and when he found that the key was no longer in the box, he nevertheless ran to the Rue Scribe. Outside, in the streets, he passed his trembling hands over the huge stones, felt for openings, came upon iron bars. Were those they? Or these? Or could it be that air-hole? He went round the building, and came to bigger bars, immense gates. It was the entrance to the Cour de l'Administration. Raoul rushed into the doorkeeper's lodge. "I beg your pardon, madam, but could you tell me where to find a gate, or a door made of bars, iron bars, opening in the Rue Scribe, and leading to the lake? You know the lake I mean, the lake, the underground lake, under the opera." "Oh, yes, sir. I know there is a lake under the opera, but I don't know which door leads to it. I've never been there." "And the Rue Scribe, madame, the Rue Scribe. Have you never been to the Rue Scribe?" The woman laughed, screamed with laughter. Raoul darted away, roaring with anger, ran upstairs 4 at a time, ran downstairs, rushed through the whole of the business side of the opera house, found himself once more on the stage. Amid a crowd of men in evening dress, all talking and gesticulating together, appeared a man who seemed very calm, and displayed a pleasant face, lit with a pair of wonderfully clear blue eyes. Messier, the acting manager, drew the Vicomte de Chagny's attention to him, and said, "This is Monsieur Mifroid, the commissary of police." "Ah, Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny. Delighted to meet you, monsieur," said the commissary. "Would you mind coming with me? And now, where are the managers? Where are the managers?" All rushed into the office, on the commissary's heels. Raoul was the last to enter. As he was following the others into the room, a hand was laid on his shoulder, and he heard these words spoken in his ear. "Eric's secrets concern no one but himself." He turned round with a stifled exclamation. The hand that had been laid on his shoulder was now placed on the lips of a person with an ebony skin and with an astrakhan cap on his head. The Persian. The stranger continued the gesture, recommending discretion, and then, at the moment when the astonished Vicomte was about to ask the reason of his mysterious interventions, bowed and disappeared. The first words of the commissary of police, when he entered the manager's office, were to ask after the missing prima donna.
So, she disappeared in the middle of the performance?
Yes. She was carried off in the prison act, at the moment when she was invoking the aid of the angels, but I doubt if she was carried off by an angel. And I am sure that she was. Everybody looked round. A young man, pale and trembling with excitement, repeated, "I am sure of it."
"Sure of what?"
asked Mifroid. "That Christine Daae was carried off by an angel, Monsieur le Commissaire, and I can tell you his name."
"Ah, Monsieur le Vicomte de Chanier. So you maintain that Christine Daae was carried off by an angel of the opera, no doubt, hmm?"
"Yes, monsieur, by an angel of the opera, and I will tell you where he lives, when we are alone." The commissary of police, inviting Raoul to take a chair, cleared the room of all the rest, excepting the managers. Then Raoul spoke. "Monsieur le Commissaire, the angel is called Eric. He lives in the opera, and he is the angel of music."
"The angel of music, really? That's very curious. The angel of music."
And turning to the managers, Monsieur Mifroid asked,
Have you an angel of music on the premises, gentlemen?"
Richard and Moncharmin shook their heads without even smiling. "Oh," said the Vicomte, "those gentlemen have heard of the opera ghost. Well, I am in a position to state that the opera ghost and the angel of music are one and the same person, and his real name is Eric."
"I beg your pardon, monsieur, but are you trying to make fun of the police? You believe that Mademoiselle Christine Daae has been carried off by an individual called Eric. Do you know this person? Have you seen him?"
"Yes."
"Where?"
"In a churchyard."
"Of course. That's where ghosts usually hang out. But what were you doing in that churchyard?"
"Monsieur," said Raoul, "I can quite understand how absurd my replies must seem to you, but I beg you to believe that I am in full possession of my faculties. The safety of the person dearest to me in the world is at stake." The door opened, and a man entered. He went up to the commissary and spoke to him in a whisper. He was obviously a detective come to deliver an important communication. During this colloquy, Monsieur Mifroid did not take his eyes off Raoul. At last, addressing him, he said,
"Monsieur, we have talked enough about the ghost. We will now talk a little about yourself, if you have no objection. You were to carry off Mademoiselle Christine Daae tonight?"
"Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"After the performance?"
"Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"All your arrangements were made?"
"Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"And nevertheless, your carriage is still outside the rotunda, awaiting your orders, is it not?"
"Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"Are you aware that Monsieur le Comte de Chanier's carriage is gone?"
"There's nothing to say to—"
"I beg your pardon. Was not Monsieur le Comte opposed to your marriage with Mademoiselle Daae?"
"That is a matter that only concerns the family."
"You have answered my question. He was opposed to it. And that was why you were taking Christine Daae out of your brother's reach. Well, Monsieur de Chanier, allow me to inform you that your brother has been smarter than you. It is he who has carried off Christine Daae."
"Impossible. Are you sure?"
"Immediately after the artist's disappearance, he flung himself into his carriage, which drove straight out of Paris by the Brussels road."
"I shall catch them," cried the young man, and he rushed out of the office.
"And bring her back to us," cried the commissary gaily. "That's a trick worth two of the angel of music's."
And turning to his audience, Monsieur Mifroid delivered a little lecture on police methods.
"I don't know in the least whether Monsieur le Comte de Chanier has really carried off Christine Daae or not, but I want to know. And I believe that at this moment no one is more anxious to inform us than his brother."
But Mifroid would not have been quite so satisfied with himself if he had known that the rush of his emissary was stopped at the entrance to the very first corridor. A tall figure blocked Raoul's way. "Where are you going so fast, Monsieur de Chanier?" asked a voice. Raoul impatiently raised his eyes and recognized the astrakhan cap of an hour ago. He stopped. "It's you," he cried in a feverish voice. "You, who know Eric's secrets and do not wish me to speak of them. Who are you?" "You know who I am. I am the Persian." Raoul now remembered that his brother had once shown him that mysterious creature, of whom nothing was known except that he was a Persian, and that he lived in a little old-fashioned flat in the Rue de Rivoli. The man with the ebony skin, the eyes of jade, and the astrakhan cap bent over Raoul. "Monsieur de Chanier, where are you going so fast?" "Cannot you guess? To Christine Daae's assistance." "Then, sir, stay here, for Christine Daae is here." "With Eric?" "With Eric." "How do you know?" "I was at the performance, and no one in the world but Eric could contrive an abduction like that." "Oh," he said with a deep sigh, "I recognize the monster's touch." "You know him, then?" The Persian did not reply, but heaved a fresh sigh. "Sir," said Raoul, I do not know what your intentions are, but can you do anything to help me? I mean, to help Christine Daae?" "I think so, Monsieur de Chanier, and that is why I spoke to you." "Well, what can you do?" "Try to take you to her, and to him." "If you can do me that service, sir, my life is yours. I place myself entirely in your hands." And the Persian, asking Raoul to deaden the sound of his footsteps, led him down passages which Raoul had never seen before, even at the time when Christine used to take him for walks through that labyrinth. "If only Darius had come," said the Persian. Who is Darius?" "Darius, my servant." After going up and down several staircases which were new to Raoul, the two men found themselves in front of a door, which the Persian opened with a master key. "Sir," said the Persian, "your tall hat will be in your way. You would do well to leave it in the dressing room." "Which dressing room?" asked Raoul. "Christine Daae's." And the Persian, letting Raoul through the door which he had just opened, showed him the actress's room opposite. They were at the end of the passage, the whole length of which Raoul had been accustomed to traverse before knocking at Christine's door. "How well you know the opera, sir." "Not so well as he does," said the Persian modestly. And he pushed the young man into Christine's dressing room, which was as Raoul had left it a few minutes earlier. There was a sound of someone stirring in the lumber room, and a few seconds later a finger tapped at the door. "Come in," said the Persian. A man entered, also wearing an astrakhan cap, and dressed in a long overcoat. He bowed, took a richly carved case from under his coat, put it on the dressing table, bowed once again, and went to the door. "Did no one see you come in, Darius?" "No, master." "Let no one see you go out." The servant glanced down the passage and swiftly disappeared. The Persian opened the case. It contained a pair of long pistols. "When Christine Daae was carried off, sir, I sent word to my servant to bring me these pistols." "Do you mean to fight a duel?" asked the young man. "It will certainly be a duel which we shall have to fight," said the other, examining the priming of his pistols. "And what a duel!" Handing one of the pistols to Raoul, he added, "In this duel we shall be 2-1, but you must be prepared for everything, for we shall be fighting the most terrible adversary that you can imagine. But you love Christine Daae, do you not?" "I worship the ground she walks on. But you, sir, who do not love her, tell me why I find you ready to risk your life for her. You must certainly hate Eric." "No, sir," said the Persian sadly. "I do not hate him. If I hated him, he would long ago have ceased to do harm." "Has he done you harm?" "I have forgiven him the harm which he has done me." I do not understand you. You treat him as a monster, you speak of his crimes. He has done you harm, and I find in you the same inexplicable pity that drove me to despair when I saw it in Christine." The Persian did not reply. He fetched a stool and set it against a wall facing the great mirror that filled the whole of the partition opposite. Then he climbed on the stool and, with his nose to the wallpaper, seemed to be looking for something. Ah, he said, after a long search. "I have it." And raising his finger above his head, he pressed against a corner in the pattern of the paper. Then he turned round and jumped off the stool. "In half a minute," he said, "we shall be on his road." "It's not turning," said Raoul impatiently. "Oh, wait, sir. The mechanism has obviously become rusty, or else the spring isn't working. He may simply have cut the cord of the counterbalance and blocked the whole apparatus." "Well, why should he? He doesn't know that we're coming this way."
"I dare say he suspects it, for he knows that I understand the system."
"It's not turning. And Christine, sir, Christine!"
The Persian added coldly, "We shall do all that is humanly possible to do. But he may stop us at the first step. He commands the walls, the doors, and the trapdoors. In my country, he was known by a name which means the trapdoor lover."
"But why do these walls obey him alone? He didn't build them?"
"Yes, sir. That is exactly what he did do."
Raoul looked at him in amazement. But the Persian made a sign to him to be silent and pointed to the glass. He himself raised his pistol opposite the glass. Raoul imitated his movement. Suddenly, the mirror turned in a blinding daze of cross lights, carrying Raoul and the Persian with it, and suddenly hurling them from the full light into the deepest darkness. The two men stood motionless for a moment, holding their breaths. At last the Persian decided to make a movement, and Raoul heard him slip onto his knees and feel for something in the dark with his groping hands. Suddenly the dimness was made visible by a small dark lantern. Then Raoul heard a faint click and saw a very pale luminous square in the floor of the passage.
"Follow me, and do all that I do."
Raoul turned to the luminous aperture. Then he saw the Persian, who was still on his knees, hang by his hands from the rim of the opening, with his pistol between his teeth, and slide into the cellar below. Raoul went on his knees also, and hung from the trap with both hands.
"Let go,"
said a voice. And he dropped into the arms of the Persian, who told him to lie down flat, closed the trapdoor above him, and crouched down beside him. The Persian made a sign to Raoul to stand up. Raoul did so. But as he did not lift his hand in front of his eyes, ready to fire, the Persian told him to resume that attitude and continue it, whatever happened. "But it tires the hand unnecessarily. If I do fire, I shan't be sure of my aim."
"Then shift your pistol to the other hand."
"I can't shoot with my left hand." Thereupon the Persian made this queer reply.
"It's not a question of shooting with the right hand or the left. It's a question of holding one of your hands as though you are going to pull the trigger of a pistol with your arm bent. As for the pistol itself, when all is said, you can put that in your pocket."
And he added, "Let this be clearly understood, or I will answer for nothing.
It is a matter of life and death. And now silence, and follow me."
The cellars of the opera are enormous, and there are 5 in number. Raoul followed the Persian and wondered what he would have done without his companion in that extraordinary labyrinth. Once in the 5th cellar, the Persian drew breath. He seemed to enjoy a greater sense of security than he had displayed when they'd stopped in the 3rd cellar. But he never altered the position of his hand, and Raoul was more and more astonished, wondering why anyone should be so gratified at being able to rely upon a pistol which he did not intend to use.
"If he does not come behind us," said the Persian, "we shall always see his yellow eyes. That is more or less our safeguard tonight. But he may come stealing up from behind, and we are dead men if we do not keep our hands as though about to fire at the level of our eyes before us."
The Persian had hardly finished speaking when a fantastic face came in sight, a whole fiery face, not only 2 yellow eyes. Yes, a head of fire came towards them at a man's height, but with no body attached to it.
"Oh," said the Persian between his teeth, "I have never seen this before. What can that flame be? It is not he, but he may have sent it. Take care! Take care! Your hand at the level of your eyes, in heaven's name, at the level of your eyes! I know most of his tricks, but not this one. Come on, let us run!"
And they fled down the long passage that opened before them. After a few seconds, that seemed to them like long minutes, they stopped.
"He doesn't often come this way," said the Persian. "This side has nothing to do with him. This side does not lead to the lake, nor to the house on the lake. But perhaps he knows that we are at his heels, though I promised him to leave him alone, and never to meddle in his affairs again."
So saying, he turned his head, and Raoul also turned his head. They again saw the head of fire behind their two heads. It had followed them. At the same time they began to perceive a certain noise of which they could not guess the nature. They simply noticed that the sound seemed to move and to approach with the fiery face. It was a noise as though thousands of nails were being scraped against a blackboard. They continued to retreat, but the fiery face came on, gaining on them. The Persian and Raoul could retreat no further, and flatten themselves against the wall. And the fiery face came on, with its noise, came level with them, and the two companions, flat against the wall, felt their hair stand on end with horror, for they now knew what the thousand noises meant. They came in a troop, hustled along in the shadow by innumerable little scurrying waves, and the little waves passed between their legs, climbed up their legs, irresistibly, and Raoul and the Persian could no longer restrain their cries of horror, dismay, and pain. Their hands went down to their legs to push back the waves, which were full of little legs and nails and claws and teeth. Raoul and the Persian were ready to faint, but the head of fire turned round in answer to their cries and spoke to them.
"Don't move. Don't move. Whatever you do, don't come after me. I am the rat-catcher. Let me pass, with my rats."
And the head of fire disappeared, vanished in the darkness, while the passage in front of it lit up as the result of the change which the rat-catcher had made in his dark lantern. Raoul and the Persian breathed again, though still trembling.
"I ought to have remembered that Eric talked to me about the rat-catcher, but he never told me that the man looked like that. Of course, Eric never comes to this part."
"Are we very far from the lake, sir? When shall we get there? Take me to the lake, oh, take me to the lake. When we are at the lake, we will call out. Christine will hear us, and he will hear us too. And as you know him, we shall talk to him."
"You baby. We shall never enter his house via the lake. We have only one means of saving Christine Daae, believe me, which is to enter the house unperceived by the monster."
"And how can one enter the house on the lake without crossing the lake?"
"From the third cellar, from which we were so unluckily driven away. We will go back there, now."
"I will tell you," said the Persian with a sudden change in his voice. "I will tell you the exact place, sir. It is between a set piece and a discarded scene from the Roi de Lahore, exactly at the spot where Joseph Bouquet died. Come, sir, take courage and follow me, and hold your hand at the level of your eyes." They went up, stopping at each step, peering into the darkness and silence, till they came to the third cellar. Here the Persian motioned to Raoul to go on his knees, and in this way, crawling on two knees and one hand, for the other hand was still held in the same position, they reached the end wall. The Persian then slipped between the set piece and the scene from the Roi de Lahore, with Raoul close upon his heels. With his free hand, the Persian felt the wall. Raoul saw him bear heavily upon one stone. Then it gave way, leaving a hole where the wall had been. This time the Persian took his pistol from his pocket and made a sign to Raoul to do as he did. He cocked the pistol, and resolutely, still on his knees, he wriggled through the hole in the wall. Raoul followed him. The hole was very narrow. The Persian stopped almost at once. Raoul heard him say in a whisper, "We shall have to drop a few yards without making a noise. Take off your boots." The Persian handed his own shoes to Raoul. "Put them outside the wall," he said. "We shall find them there when we leave." He crawled a little further on his knees, then turned right round, and facing Raoul said, "I am going to hang by my hands from the edge of the stone, and let myself drop into his house. You must do exactly the same. Do not be afraid. I will catch you in my arms." Raoul soon heard the dull sound of the Persian's fall, and then dropped in his turn. He felt himself clasped in the Persian's arms. "Shh," said the Persian, and they stood motionless, listening. The darkness was thick around them, the silence heavy and terrible. Then the Persian began to make play with the dark lantern again, turning the rays over the walls. "The wall is a looking-glass." "Yes, a looking-glass," said the Persian, in a tone of deep feeling, and passing the hand that held the pistol over his moist forehead, he added, "We have dropped into his torture chamber. What the person knew of this torture chamber, and what there befell him and his companion, shall be told in his own words as set down in a manuscript which he left behind him, and which I copy as I found it. Ever since I discovered Eric installed in the opera, I have lived in a perpetual terror of his horrible fancies. Not insofar as I was concerned, but I dreaded everything for others. And whenever some accident, some fatal event happened, I always thought to myself, I should not be surprised if that were Eric, even as others used to say, it's the ghost. Although Eric announced to me very solemnly that he had altered, and that he had become the most virtuous of men, since he was loved for himself, a sentence that at first perplexed me most terribly, I could not help shuddering when I thought of the monster. His horrible, unparalleled, and repulsive ugliness put him without the pale of humanity, and it often seemed to me that for this reason he had ceased to believe that he had any duty toward the human race. I continued to be greatly interested in the relations between Eric and Christine Daae, not in any morbid curiosity, but because of the terrible thought which obsessed my mind, that Eric was capable of anything, if he once discovered that he was not loved for his own sake, as he imagined. I continued to wander very cautiously about the opera, and soon learned the truth about the monster's dreary love affair. He filled Christine's mind through the terror of which he inspired her, but the dear child's heart belonged wholly to Vicomte Raoul de Chagny. While they played about like an innocent engaged couple, keeping to the upper floors of the opera to avoid the monster, they little suspected that someone was watching over their safety. I was prepared to go to all lengths, to kill the monster if necessary, and explain to the police afterwards. But Eric did not show himself, and I felt none the more comfortable for that. On the day of the abduction of Christine Daae, I did not come to the theatre until rather late in the evening, trembling lest I should hear bad news. I had spent a horrible day, for after reading in the morning paper the announcement of the forthcoming marriage between Christine and the Vicomte de Chagny, I wondered whether, after all, I should not do better to denounce the monster. But my common sense returned to me, and soon showed me that any such action would only precipitate the possible catastrophe. When my cab put me down before the opera, I was really almost astonished to see it still standing. But I am something of a fatalist, like all good Orientals, and I entered, ready for anything. Christine Daae's abduction in the prison act, which naturally surprised everybody, found me prepared. I was quite certain that she had been juggled away by Eric, that prince of conjurers. I resolved personally to act without further delay. The chances were that Eric at that moment was thinking only of his captive. This was the moment to enter his house through the third cellar, and I resolved to take with me that poor little desperate Vicomte, who at the first suggestion accepted with an amount of confidence in myself that touched me profoundly. The Vicomte is a brave little fellow, but he knew hardly anything about his adversary, and that was all the better. My great fear was lest he were already somewhere near us, preparing the Punjab lasso. No one knows better than he how to throw the Punjab lasso, for he is the king of stranglers even as he is the prince of conjurers. He had lived in India and acquired an incredible skill in the art of strangulation. He would make them lock him into a courtyard, to which they brought a warrior, usually a man condemned to death, armed with a long pike and a big sword. Eric had only his lasso, and it was always just when the warrior thought that he was going to fell Eric with a tremendous blow that we heard the lasso whiz through the air. With a turn of the wrist, Eric tightened the noose around his adversary's neck and, in this fashion, dragged him before the little sultana and her woman, who sat looking from a window and applauding. On arriving with the Vicomte de Chagny in the cellars of the opera, I felt bound to protect my companion against the ever-threatening danger of death by strangling. I simply told Monsieur de Chagny to keep his hand at the level of his eyes, with the arm bent, as though waiting for the command to fire. With his victim in this attitude, it is impossible even to the most expert strangler to throw a lasso with advantage. It catches you not only around the neck, but also around the arm or hand. This enables you easily to unloose the lasso, which then becomes harmless. The Vicomte and I arrived in the third cellar between the set piece and the scene from the Roi de Lahore. I worked the stone, and we jumped into the house which Eric had built himself within the foundation walls of the opera. And this was the easiest thing in the world for him to do, because Eric was one of the chief contractors under Philippe Gagnier, the architect of the opera, and continued to work mysteriously, all by himself, when the works were officially suspended during the war, the siege of Paris, and the Commune. I knew my Eric too well to feel at all comfortable when I jumped into his house. I knew what he had made of a certain palace at Mazanderan. He hit upon astonishing inventions. Of these, the most curious, horrible, and dangerous was the so-called torture chamber. No one was let into it but wretches condemned to death. And even then, when these had had enough, they were always at liberty to put an end to themselves with a Punjab lasso or bowstring, left to their use at the foot of an iron tree. My alarm, therefore, was great when I saw that the room into which Monsieur le Vicomte de Chanier and I had dropped was an exact copy of the torture chamber of Mazanderan. At our feet, I found the Punjab lasso which I had been dreading all the evening. I am no coward, but cold sweat covered my forehead as I moved the little red disc of my lantern over the walls. Monsieur de Chanier noticed it and asked, "What is the matter, sir?" I made him a violent sign to be silent. We were in the middle of a small six-cornered room, the sides of which were covered with mirrors from floor to ceiling. Suddenly, we heard noises on our left. It sounded at first like a door opening and shutting in the next room, and then came a dull moan. I clutched Monsieur de Chanier's arm more firmly still, and then we distinctly heard the words, "You must make your choice, the wedding mass or the requiem mass." I recognized the voice of the monster. There was another moan, followed by a long silence. I was persuaded by now that the monster was unaware of our presence in his house. The important thing was not to let him know, and I dreaded nothing so much as the impulsiveness of the Vicomte de Chanier, who wanted to rush through the walls to Christine Daae, whose moans, as we thought, we continued to hear at intervals. Soon the moans increased. I have never heard anything more despairing, and Monsieur de Chanier and I recognized that this terrible lamentation came from Eric himself. Christine seemed to stand dumb with horror, without strength to cry out, while the monster was on his knees before her. 3 times over Eric fiercely bewailed his fate. "You don't love me, you don't love me, you don't love me." And then more gently, "Why do you cry? You know it gives me pain to see you cry." A silence. Suddenly, the silence in the next room was disturbed by the ringing of an electric bell. There was a sound on the other side of the wall, and Eric's voice of thunder, "Somebody ringing. Who has come bothering now? Wait for me here." Steps moved away. A door closed. Christine was alone behind the wall. The Vicomte de Chanier was already calling to her, "Christine, Christine!" At last a faint voice reached us. "I am dreaming. Christine, Christine, it is I, Raoul." Then Christine's voice whispered Raoul's name. She trembled lest Eric should discover where Raoul was hidden. She told us in a few hurried words that Eric had gone quite mad with love, and that he had decided to kill everybody and himself with everybody, if she did not consent to become his wife. He had given her till 11 o'clock the next evening for reflection. She must then choose, as he said, between the wedding mass and the requiem. "Can you tell us where Eric is?" I asked. She replied that he must have left the house. "Could you make sure?" No, I am fastened. I cannot stir a limb." When we heard this, Monsieur de Chanier and I gave a yell of fury. Our safety, the safety of all the 3 of us, depended on the girl's liberty of movement. "But where are you?" asked Christine. "There are only 2 doors in my room. A door through which Eric comes and goes, and another which he has forbidden me ever to go through. The door of the torture chamber." "Christine, that is where we are." "You are in the torture chamber?" "Yes, but we cannot see the door." "Oh, if I could only drag myself so far. I would knock at the door, and that would tell you where it is." "Is it a door with a lock to it?" I asked. "Yes, with a lock." "Where is the key?" I asked. "In the next room, near the organ, with another little bronze key, which he also forbade me to touch. They are both in a little leather bag, which he calls the bag of life and death." "Raoul, Raoul, fly! Everything is mysterious and terrible here, and Eric will soon have gone quite mad."
"Christine," said the young man, "we will go from here together or die together." "We must keep cool," I whispered. "Why has he fastened you, mademoiselle?" "I tried to commit suicide. The monster went out last night after carrying me here fainting and half chloroformed. He was going to his banker, so he said. When he returned, he found me with my face covered with blood. I tried to kill myself by striking my forehead against the wall." "Christine," groaned Raoul, and he began to sob. "Then he bound me. I am not allowed to die until 11 o'clock tomorrow evening." "Mademoiselle," I declared, "the monster bound you, and he shall unbind you. You have only to play the necessary part. Remember that he loves you." "Alas," we heard, "am I likely to forget it?" "Remember it and smile on him. Entreat him. Tell him that your bonds hurt you." But Christine Daae said, "Shh." Heavy steps dragged slowly behind the wall, stopped, and then made the floor creak once more. Next came a tremendous sigh, followed by a cry of horror from Christine, and we heard Eric's voice. "Why did you cry out, Christine?" "Because I am in pain, Eric. I thought I had frightened you. Eric, unloose my bonds. Am I not your prisoner? You will try to kill yourself again. You have given me till 11 o'clock tomorrow evening, Eric." The footsteps dragged along the floor once more. "Since we are to die together, and since I am just as eager to die as you are. Yes, I have had enough of this life, you know. Don't move. I will release you. You have only one word to say, no, and it will at once be finished with everybody. There, you're free now." "Oh, Christine, look at your poor wrists. Tell me, have I hurt them? That alone deserves death." Suddenly, the voice changed and grated out these metallic syllables. "What have you done with my bag?" The voice repeated angrily, "What have you done with my bag? So it was to take my bag that you asked me to release you." We heard hurried steps. "What are you running away for?" asked the furious voice, which had followed her. "Give me back my bag, will you? Don't you know that it is the bag of life and death?" "Listen to me, Eric," sighed the girl. "As it is settled that we are to live together, what difference can it make to you?" "You know there are only 2 keys in it," said the monster. "What do you want to do?" "I want to look into this room, which I have never seen, and which you have always kept hidden from me. It's woman's curiosity. Come, give me back my bag. Leave the key alone, will you, you inquisitive little thing?" And he chuckled, while Christine gave a cry of pain. At that moment the Vicomte could not help uttering an exclamation of impotent rage. "Hello, what's that?" said the monster. "Did you hear, Christine?" No, replied the poor girl. "I heard nothing." There was a cry. "There is someone in the torture chamber." "Aha! I understand now." "There is no one there, Eric." "I understand. No one. The man you want to marry, perhaps?" "I don't want to marry anybody. You know I don't." "Well, it won't take long to find out. Christine, my love, we need not open the door to see what is happening in the torture chamber. Would you like to see? Look here. If there is really someone there, you will see the invisible window light up at the top of the wall near the ceiling." And that which I feared above all things began, automatically. We were suddenly flooded with light. The Vicomte de Chagny was so much taken by surprise that he staggered where he stood, and the angry voice roared, "I told you there was someone. Do you see the window now? The lighted window right up there? The man behind the wall can't see it, but you shall go up the folding steps. They are there to give a peep into the torture chamber. Go and peep through the little window. Tell me what he looks like." We heard the steps being dragged against the wall. "Up with you." "No? Then I will go up myself, dear." "Oh, very well, I will go up. Let me go." "Oh, my darling, how sweet of you. How nice of you to save me the exertion at my age. Tell me what he looks like." At that moment, we distinctly heard these words above our heads. "There is no one there, dear." "No one. Are you sure there's no one?" "Why, of course not, no one." "Well, that's all right. What's the matter, Christine? You're not going to faint, are you, considering that there is no one there? Here, come down. That's it, pull yourself together. As there is no one there, but how do you like the landscape?" "Oh, very much. Did you design that room? It's very handsome, you know. You're a great artist, Eric." Yes, a great artist in my own line, but I am getting very tired of it. I am sick and tired of having a torture chamber in my house and of living like a mountebank. I'm tired of it. I want a nice, quiet flat with ordinary doors and windows and a wife inside it like everybody else. My dear little Christine, are you listening to me? Tell me you love me. No, you don't love me. But no matter, you will. Once you could not look at my mask because you knew what was behind. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. But you would have had lots of fun with me. For instance, I am the greatest ventriloquist that ever lived. I'm the finest ventriloquist in the world. You're laughing. Perhaps you don't believe me. Listen. My mouth is closed, such mouth as I have, and yet you hear my voice. Where will you have it? In your left ear, in your right ear, on the table, in these little ebony boxes on the mantelpiece? Listen, dear, it's the little box on the right of the mantelpiece. What does it say? Shall I turn the scorpion? And now, crack! What does it say in the little box on the left? Shall I turn the grasshopper? And now, crack! Here it is in the little leather bag. What does it say? I am the little bag of life and death. And now, crack! Ha ha! Where is Eric's voice now? Listen, Christine, darling, listen. It is behind the door of the torture chamber. Listen, it's myself in the torture chamber. And what do I say? I say, woe to them that have a nose, a real nose, and come to look round the torture chamber. Ha ha ha! Ha ha! Oh, the ventriloquist's terrible voice. It was everywhere. Everywhere. It passed through the little invisible window, through the walls. It ran around us, between us. Eric was there, speaking to us. Eric! Eric! Said Christine's voice. You tire me with your voice. Don't go on, Eric! Isn't it very hot here? Oh, yes, replied Eric's voice. The heat is unendurable. But what does this mean? The wall is quite hot. The wall is burning. I'll tell you, Christine, dear, it is because of the forest next door. Well, what has that got to do with it, the forest? Why, didn't you see that it was an African forest? And the monster laughed so loudly and hideously that we could no longer distinguish Christine's beseeching cries. The Vicomte de Chagny shouted and banged against the walls like a madman. I could not restrain him. And then there was the sound of a body falling on the floor and being dragged along, and a door slammed. And then nothing. Nothing more around us save the scorching silence of the tropics, in the heart of an equatorial forest. I have said that the room in which we were imprisoned was a regular hexagon, lined throughout with mirrors. Plenty of these rooms have been seen since, mainly at exhibitions. They are called palaces of illusion. A decorative object, such as a column, for instance, was placed in one of the corners, and immediately produced a hall of 1,000 columns. For, thanks to the mirrors, the real room was multiplied by 6 hexagonal rooms, each of which in its turn was multiplied indefinitely. For the architectural motif placed in one corner, Eric substituted an iron tree. The ceiling was capable of being lit up. An ingenious system of electric heating allowed the temperature of the walls and the room to be increased at will. I am reciting all these details of a perfectly straightforward invention, giving, with the aid of a few painted branches, the supernatural illusion of an equatorial forest blazing under the tropical sun. When the ceiling lit up and the forest became visible around us, the Vicomte's stupefaction was immense. That impenetrable forest, with its innumerable trunks and branches, threw him into a terrible state of consternation. He passed his hands over his forehead as though to drive away a dream. There was only one possible outlet, that opening into the room in which Eric and Christine Dye were. But this outlet was absolutely invisible to us. We must therefore try to open it without even knowing where it was. I did my best to induce the poor Vicomte to listen to reason. I made him touch the mirrors and the iron tree and the branches and explain to him by optical laws all the luminous imagery of which we were surrounded. We are in a room, a little room. That is what you must keep saying to yourself, and we shall leave the room as soon as we have found the door. And I promised him that if he let me act without disturbing me by shouting and walking up and down, I would discover the trick of the door in less than an hour's time. I tackled the glass panel and began to finger it in every direction, hunting for the spot which I must press in order to turn the door in accordance with Eric's system of pivots.
I had been working like this for half an hour, and had finished 3 panels, when, as ill luck would have it, I turned round on hearing a muttered exclamation from the Vicomte. "I am stifling," he said. "All these mirrors are sending out an infernal heat. Do you think you will find that spring soon? If you are much longer about it, we shall be roasted alive." Now the fever laid hold of me in my turn, for I found nothing, absolutely nothing. In the next room, all was silence. We were utterly lost in the forest, without an outlet, a compass, a guide, or anything. Though I knew what awaited us if anybody came to our aid, or if I did not find the spring. But look as I might, I found nothing but branches, beautiful branches that stood straight up before me, or spread gracefully over my head, but they gave no shade. And this was natural enough, as we were in an equatorial forest, with the sun right above our heads, an African forest. Lastly, and this was the most pitiless torture of all, we heard the rain, and it was not raining. You should have seen us putting out our tongues and dragging ourselves towards the rippling river bank. When we reached the mirror, Monsieur de Chauny licked it, and I also licked the glass. It was burning hot. Then we rolled on the floor with a hoarse cry of despair. Monsieur de Chauny put the one pistol that was still loaded to his temple, and I stared at the Punjab lasso at the foot of the iron tree. But as I stared at the Punjab lasso, I saw a thing that made me start so violently that Monsieur de Chauny delayed his attempt at suicide. I seized him by the arm, and then I caught the pistol from him. I had discovered, near the Punjab lasso, on a groove in the floor, a black-headed nail whose use I knew. At last I had found the spring. The black-headed nail yielded to my pressure, and then we saw, not a door opening in the wall, but a cellar flap released in the floor. Cool air came to us from below. We stooped over that square of darkness as though over a limpid well. What could there be in that cellar which opened before us? Water? Water to drink? I thrust my arm into the darkness, and came upon a stone, and another stone, a staircase. The staircase was a winding one, and led down into pitchy darkness. But oh, how deliciously cool were the darkness and the stairs! The lake could not be far away. We soon reached the bottom. Our eyes were beginning to accustom themselves to the dark, to distinguish shapes around us, circular shapes, on which I turned the light of my lantern. Barrels. We were in Eric's cellar. It was here that he must keep his wine and perhaps his drinking water. I knew that Eric was a great lover of good wine. There was plenty to drink here, but all the barrels were hermetically closed. Then, after half lifting one to make sure that it was full, with the blade of a small knife which I carried, I prepared to stave in the bunghole. Monsieur de Chauny put his 2 hands together underneath it, and with a last effort I burst the bung. "What's this?" cried the Vicomte. "This isn't water." The Vicomte put his 2 full hands close to my lantern. I stopped to look, and at the same moment flung away my lantern with such violence that it broke and went out, leaving us in utter darkness. What I had seen in Monsieur de Chauny's hands was gunpowder. The discovery flung us into a state of alarm which made me forget all about our past and present sufferings. We now knew what the monster meant to convey when he said to Christine Daae, "Yes or no. If your answer is no, everybody will be dead and buried. Yes, buried under the ruins of the Paris Opera House. 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. We were all to be blown up in the middle of the performance if Christine Daae said no." And what else could Christine say but no? Would she not prefer to espouse death itself, rather than that living corpse? 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. And we dragged ourselves through the darkness, feeling our way to the stone steps. At last I found the staircase. But suddenly I drew myself up on the first step, for a terrible thought had come into my mind. What is the time? We seem to have been imprisoned in that hell for days and days. Perhaps we should be blown up then and there. Ah! A sound, a crack. Did you hear that? There, in the corner, like a sound of machinery that is to blow everything up. Monsieur de Chauny and I began to yell like madmen. We rushed up the treads of the staircase, stumbling as we went, anything to escape the dark, to return to the mortal light of the room of mirrors. We dragged ourselves along the floor of the torture chamber, the floor between us and the powder magazine. What was the time? We shouted, we called out, Monsieur de Chauny to Christine, I to Eric. I reminded him that I had saved his life, but no answer, save the echoing cry of our despair. Suddenly I exclaimed, "Hush!" I thought I heard footsteps in the next room. Someone tapped against the wall. Christine Daae's voice said, "Raoul! Raoul!" We now all began to talk at once, on either side of the wall. Christine sobbed. She had not felt sure that she would find Monsieur de Chanier alive. The monster had been terrible, waiting for her to give him the yes, which she refused. And yet she had promised him that yes, if he would take her to the torture chamber. But he had obstinately declined. At last, after hours and hours of that hell, he had this moment gone out, leaving her alone to reflect for the last time. Hours and hours. What is the time now? What is the time, Christine? It is 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock, all but 5 minutes. But which 11 o'clock? The 11 o'clock that is to decide life or death. He told me so before he went. He is quite mad. Here, he said, taking a key from the little bag of life and death. Here is the little bronze key that opens the 2 ebony caskets on the mantelpiece. In one of the caskets, you will find a bronze scorpion. In the other, a grasshopper. They will say yes or no for you. If you turn the scorpion, I shall understand when I come back that you have said yes. The grasshopper will mean no. And he laughed like a drunken demon. I did nothing but beg and entreat him to give me the key of the torture chamber, promising to be his wife if he granted me this request. But he told me that there was no further need for that key, and that he was going to throw it into the lake, and he again laughed like a drunken demon and left me. Oh, his last words were, "The grasshopper, mind the grasshopper. A grasshopper not only turns, it hops, and it hops jolly high." There was no doubt that the grasshopper controlled an electric current intended to blow up the powder magazine. "Here he comes," said Christine. "I hear him." We heard his steps approaching the room. He came up to Christine, but did not speak. Then I raised my voice. "Eric, it is I. Do you know me?" With extraordinary calmness, he at once replied, "So, you are not dead in there. Well then, keep quiet." I tried to speak, but he said coldly, "Not a word, daroga, or I shall blow everything up. The honor rests with Mademoiselle. There, I open the little ebony caskets. Mademoiselle, look at the little dears inside. Aren't they pretty? If you turn the grasshopper, Mademoiselle, we shall all be blown up. There is enough gunpowder under our feet to blow up the whole section of Paris. If you turn the scorpion, Mademoiselle, all that powder will be soaked and drowned. Mademoiselle, to celebrate our wedding, you shall make a very handsome present to a few hundred Parisians who are at this moment applauding a poor masterpiece of Meyerbeer's. You shall make them a present of their lives, for with your own fair hands you shall turn the scorpion, and merrily, merrily, we will be married." A pause. And then, "If in 2 minutes, mademoiselle, you have not turned the scorpion, I shall turn the grasshopper, and the grasshopper, I tell you, hops jolly high." The terrible silence began anew. The Vicomte de Chanier, realizing that there was nothing left to do but pray, went down on his knees and prayed. At last we heard Eric's voice. "The 2 minutes are past. Goodbye, mademoiselle. Hop, grasshopper." "Eric," cried Christine, "do you swear to me that the scorpion is the one to turn?" "Yes, to hop at our wedding." "Ah, you see, you said to hop. At our wedding, ingenious child. The scorpion opens the ball. But that will do. You won't have the scorpion? Then I turn the grasshopper." "Eric, enough!" I was crying out in concert with Christine. Monsieur de Chanier was still on his knees, praying. "Eric, I have turned the scorpion." Oh, the second through which we passed. Waiting. Feeling something crack beneath our feet. Hearing an appalling hiss through the open trapdoor. A hiss like the first sound of a rocket. But it was not the hiss of fire. It was more like the hiss of water. We rushed to the trapdoor. All our thirst, which had vanished when the terror came, now returned with the lapping of the water. The water rose in the cellar above the powder barrels, and we went down to it with parched throats. It rose to our chins, to our mouths, and we drank. We stood on the floor of the cellar, and we drank. And we went up the stairs again in the dark, step by step, went up with the water. The water came out of the cellar with us, and spread over the floor of the room. If this went on, the whole house on the lake would be swamped. "Eric, Eric,
That is water enough for the gunpowder. Turn off the tap. Turn off the scorpion. But Eric did not reply. We had nothing but the water rising. It was halfway up to our waists. "Christine!" cried Monsieur de Chanier. "Christine! The water is up to our knees!" But Christine did not reply. We had nothing but the water rising. No one in the next room, no one to turn the tap, no one to turn the scorpion. We were all alone in the dark, with the dark water that seized us and clasped us and froze us. Were we to die here, drowned in the torture chamber? "Eric! Eric!" I cried. "I saved your life, remember? You were sentenced to death. But for me you would be dead now. Eric!" We whirled round in the water like so much wreckage. But suddenly my straying hand seized the trunk of the iron tree. I called Monsieur de Chanier, and we both clung to the branch of the iron tree, and the water rose still higher. Our arms became entangled in the effort of swimming. We choked. We struggled in the dark water. I lost my strength. I tried to lay hold of the walls. Oh, how those glass walls slipped from under my groping fingers. We whirled round again. We began to sink. One last effort, a last cry. "Eric! Christine!" So ended the written narrative which the Persian left behind. Monsieur de Chanier and his companion were saved by the sublime devotion of Christine Daae. I had the rest of the story from the lips of the daroga himself. It seems that, when he opened his eyes, the daroga found himself lying on a bed. Monsieur de Chanier was asleep on a sofa beside the wardrobe. An angel and a devil were watching over them. Christine Daae didn't say a word. She moved about noiselessly, like a sister of charity who had taken a vow of silence. She brought a cup of hot tea. The man in the mask took it from her hands and gave it to the Persian. Monsieur de Chanier was still sleeping. Eric poured a drop of rum into the daroga's cup and, pointing to the Vicomte, said, "He came to himself long before we knew if you were still alive, daroga. He is quite well. He is asleep. We must not wake him. You are now saved, both of you. And soon I shall take you up to the surface of the earth, to please my wife." Eventually, the Persian fell asleep, like Monsieur de Chanier, and did not wake until he was in his own room, nursed by his faithful Darius, who told him that on the night before he was found propped against the door of his flat, where he had been brought by a stranger who rang the bell before going away. As soon as the daroga recovered his strength and his wits, he sent to Count Philippe's house to inquire after the Vicomte's health. The answer was that the young man had not been seen, and that Count Philippe was dead. His body was found on the bank of the Opera Lake, on the Rue Scribe side. The Persian remembered the Requiem Mass which he had heard from behind the wall of the torture chamber, and had no doubt regarding the crime and the criminal. The Persian did not hesitate. He determined to inform the police. Now the case was in the hands of an examining magistrate called Faure, an incredulous, commonplace, superficial sort of person. Monsieur Faure took down the daroga's depositions and proceeded to treat him as a madman. Despairing of ever obtaining a hearing, the Persian sat down to write. As the police did not want his evidence, perhaps the press would be glad of it. And he had just written the last line of the narrative, which I have already quoted, when Darius announced the visit of a stranger who refused to give his name, who would not show his face, and who declared simply that he did not intend to leave the place until he had spoken to the daroga. The Persian at once felt who his singular visitor was, and ordered him to be shown in. It was the ghost. It was Eric. He looked extremely weak and leaned against the wall as though afraid of falling. The Persian rose to his feet as Eric entered. "Murderer of Count Philippe, what have you done with his brother and Christine Daae?" Eric staggered under the direct attack, kept silent for a moment, dragged himself to a chair, and heaved a deep sigh. "Daroga, don't talk to me about Count Philippe. It was an accident. He fell very awkwardly into the lake." "You lie!" shouted the Persian. Eric bowed his head and said, "I have not come here to talk about Count Philippe, but to tell you that I am going To die. Where are Raoul de Chagny and Christine Daae? I am going to die of love. That is how it is. I loved her so, and I love her still, Doroga, and I am dying of love for her. If you knew how beautiful she was when she let me kiss her, alive. It was the first time, Doroga, the first time I ever kissed a woman. The Persian shook Eric by the arm. Will you tell me if she is alive or dead? Why do you shake me like that? Asked Eric. I tell you, I am going to die. Yes, I kissed her alive. And now she is dead. I tell you, I kissed her just like that on her forehead, and she did not draw back her forehead from my lips. As to her being dead, I don't think so. But it has nothing to do with me. No, she's not dead. She's a good, honest girl, and she saved your life, Doroga, at a moment when I would not have given twopence for your Persian skin. What were you there for with that little chap? You would have died as well as he. I told her that she had turned the scorpion she had of her own free will become engaged to me, and that she did not want two men engaged to her, which was true enough. As for you, you did not exist. You had ceased to exist, I tell you, and you were going to die with the other. Only mark me, Doroga. When you were yelling like the devil because of the water, Christine swore to me, as she hoped to be saved, that she would be my living wife. Until then, in the depths of her eyes, Doroga, I had always seen my dead wife. It was the first time I saw my living wife there. She was sincere, as she hoped to be saved. She would not kill herself. It was a bargain. Half a minute later, all of the water was back in the lake. And I had a hard job with you, Doroga, for, upon my honour, I thought you were done for. However, it was understood that I was to take you both up to the surface of the earth. What have you done with the Vicomte de Chagny? Asked the Persian, interrupting him. You see, Doroga, I couldn't carry him up like that at once. He was a hostage. I chained him up nicely in the communist dungeon, which is in the remote part of the opera below the fifth cellar, where no one ever comes. Then I went back to Christine. She was waiting for me erect and alive, a real living bride, and I kissed her. Oh, how good it is, Doroga, to kiss a person. My mother, Doroga, my poor unhappy mother, would never let me kiss her. She used to run away and throw me my mask. Nor any other woman, ever. Oh, you can understand my happiness was so great I cried. And she also cried. The angel cried. I felt her tears flow on my forehead. They trickled under my mask. They mingled with the tears in my eyes. Listen, Doroga. Listen to what I did. I tore off my mask so as not to lose one of her tears, and she did not run away. She remained alive, weeping over me, with me. We cried together. I've tasted all the happiness the world can offer. I heard her say, "Poor, unhappy Eric." And she took my hand. I held in my hand a ring, a plain gold ring which I had given her, which she had lost, and which I had found again. A wedding ring, you know. I slipped it into her little hand and said, "There, take it. Take it for you and him. It shall be my wedding present. A present from your poor, unhappy Eric. I know you love the boy. Don't cry any more." She asked me in a very soft voice what I meant. Then I made her understand that she should marry the young man when she pleased, because she had cried with me and mingled her tears with mine. I went and released the young man,
and told him to come with me to Christine. They kissed before me in the Louis Philippe room. Christine had my ring. I made Christine swear to come back one night when I was dead, crossing the lake from the Rue Scribe side, and bury me in the greatest secrecy with the gold ring, which she was to wear until that moment. Then Christine kissed me, for the first time herself, here, on the forehead. Don't look, Daroga! Here, on the forehead. On my forehead! My forehead! Mine! Don't look, Daroga! And they went off together. Daroga. Daroga, if Christine keeps her promise, she will come back soon. The monster resumed his mask and collected his strength to leave the Daroga. He told him that when he felt his end to be close at hand, he would send him, in gratitude for the kindness which the Persian had once shown him, the things which he held dearest in the world. All Christine Daae's papers, together with a few objects belonging to her, such as a pair of gloves, a shoe buckle, and 2 pocket handkerchiefs. In reply to the Persian's question, Eric told him that the young people, as soon as they found themselves free, had resolved to go and look for a priest in some lonely spot where they could hide their happiness. Lastly, Eric relied on the Persian, as soon as he received the promised relics and papers, to inform the young couple of his death and to advertise it in the Epoque. That was all. The Persian saw Eric to the door of his flat, and Darius helped him down to the street. A cab was waiting for him. Eric stepped in, and the Persian, who had gone back to the window, heard him say to the driver, "Go to the opera," and the cab drove off into the night. The Persian had seen the poor, unhappy Eric for the last time. 3 weeks later, the Epoque published this advertisement: Eric is dead.